A celebrated chef disappears after midnight, leaving only whispers in the kitchen. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? Your comments make these mysteries unforgettable. Let's begin. I settled in at my desk a little after 10 that morning, with the sun draping its golden ribbon across the brownstone's parquet floor. Fritz had already staked his claim on the kitchen, meaning the day's menu would march forward without interruption, and Wolfe had barricaded himself upstairs in the plant rooms with orchids that received more caresses than most women ever would. In short, business as usual. That is, until the doorbell shattered the calm with a sound that promised disruption. I opened the door to find a man in a white chef's jacket, the kind of crisp cotton that looked like it had been ironed by a whole battalion. His hat was gone, probably lost somewhere between a cab ride and his nerves, and his dark eyes darted left and right as though the sidewalk had teeth. "My name is Paolo Vareni," he said, his Italian accent curling around the syllables like olive oil on a plate. "I must see Mr. Wolfe, at once." Now, I've had my share of people demanding audiences with the great Nero Wolfe. Most of them turn out to be cranks, con men, or otherwise not worth the time it takes to buzz them in. But this fellow looked like the real article. His hands were the hands of a cook, stained faintly by saffron and scarred by the love bites of hot pans. I let him in, and in the 2 minutes it took for us to climb the stairs to Wolfe's office, he told me just enough to make me curious. He was a rising star in the New York restaurant world, known for midnight tasting menus that ran until dawn. And last night, right after service, one of his sous chefs, his most trusted man, vanished without a trace. Left the knife still warm on the cutting board, disappeared as if the city swallowed him whole. When we entered Wolfe's office, Wolfe himself was already back in the red leather chair, having descended with the stealth of a man who never does anything quickly but always manages to be present at the right moment. He had not spoken a word yet, which was his way of reserving judgment on whether the interruption was worth the air he would expend. "Mr. Wolfe," Vareni said, standing rigid at the threshold like a soldier reporting to a general. "Please, I need your help. This man, Marco Bellanti, he's not just an employee. He is like my brother, and now he is gone after midnight with no note, no sign. The police, they say men vanish in this city all the time. But I know, this is not chance. This is a warning. To me." Wolfe's eyes opened only slightly wider, but I knew him well enough to translate that half-inch of eyelid. Interest had been piqued, though whether by the missing chef or by the possibility of someone tampering with culinary talent, I couldn't yet say. "You are mistaken if you expect me to go chasing after a truant cook," Wolfe said at last, his voice calm but weighty, like a lid placed on a simmering pot. "I do not stir from this chair." "I know," Vareni pressed. "That is why I come here. You can sit. You can think. You can see what others do not." His voice trembled, but not with fear, with urgency. "This is not a quarrel. This is sabotage. Somebody wants to destroy me, my name, my restaurant. And they start with Marco." I saw Wolfe's lips pressed together. The word sabotage had done its work. If there's one thing guaranteed to crawl under his skin, it's the deliberate corruption of skill, whether in orchids, in words, or on a plate. Wolfe took in a breath that signaled his decision had been made, though he dressed it in formality. "Mr. Goodwin will obtain the particulars. You will supply him with every relevant name and circumstance. If, after my examination, the matter warrants my exertion, we shall proceed." That was all. Dismissal wrapped in velvet. But it meant Wolfe had already boarded the train. The destination was hidden from the rest of us, but I could feel the wheels beginning to turn. Vareni nodded, relief and dread mingling on his face. "Grazie," he murmured. "I will tell you everything, but please, time is short. The longer Marco is gone, the more certain it becomes. I will never see him again." He left the office an hour later, lighter by a detailed account and heavier by Wolfe's silence. Wolfe hadn't spoken again after the initial pronouncement, but that was normal. He wouldn't give away his thoughts while they were still marinating. I shut the door behind the chef and turned to Wolfe. "You didn't take this for Marco, did you?" "No," Wolfe said, eyes closed. "For cuisine." That was his way of admitting the brownstone had just been disturbed. And me? I knew that meant my shoes were about to wear out faster than usual. Fritz brought me a demi-tasse the way a man presents a relic, and I took it like a parishioner. It was 1 minute shy of noon, which meant I had 60 seconds to make myself scarce if I wanted to avoid joining the ritual of midday beer and scowl. Wolfe had the eyes shut in the red chair, hands tented under the slope of his chest, and the orchid room's ghost perfume clung to his sleeves. If you ever doubt the existence of angels, try getting Wolfe's attention before lunch. You'll learn where they refuse to tread. I set my notebook on the edge of his desk and gave him the highlights before the gong. Paolo Vareni, 38, came over at 20, cooked his way up through a Williamsburg pizza joint, then a Soho bistro, then his own place in the Lower East named Confluo. He's the brand and the barker. Marco Bellanti is 33, born in Queens, trained by a butcher father and the Marines. Sous chef for 2 years. Last night they ran the midnight menu, 16 covers, mostly industry. At 2:15, Marco left the line to check a delivery ledger in the office. Didn't come back. His jacket is in his locker, his phone is on the charger in the office, and his knife roll is missing. Back door alarm says open at 2:19, closed at 2:20. That's a 30-foot alley ending in a steel gate with a key lock. 2 employees have keys, Varini and the general manager. Also, the investor. The investor has a copy. He didn't move, but his eyelids fluttered 1/4 of a millimeter. You learn to read, Wolfe, the way you read a barometer. It's not the numbers, it's the air shifting. I added the garnish. The investor is one Lydia Crane. Her money came from a food delivery app that flame-broiled itself last year and left her with enough cash to buy 3 restaurants and an opinion about everything. The general manager answers to Kieran Duval. 40, calm as a frozen lake. There's also a pastry lead named Zadie who hates the midnight menu, a line cook, Eduardo, who used to work for Marco at a butcher's shop, and a dishwasher with the unfortunate name of Lucky, who's unlucky enough to have a record. The police checked the alley and the dumpster. No blood, no signs of a party. We don't know if Marco left on his own 2 feet or if somebody else's. The gong sounded from the dining room. Fritz doesn't need a clock. He is one. Wolfe opened his eyes at the exact tempo and gave me a glance that said he'd heard all of it, and none of it mattered until his stomach had been supplicated. I vacated before he suggested a more permanent method. Over oxtail consommé and a salad that had traveled a diplomatic route from Fritz's garden to the plate, Wolfe addressed the ceiling. "This is not kidnapping," he said. "No ransom, no theatrics. Besides, thieves are vulgar. Saboteurs are prouder. They smear reputation. They sow doubt." He scooped tarragon butter onto a roll with the devotion of a monk illuminating a manuscript. "Mr. Varini's business depends on timing and flavor. Disrupt either, and he collapses. A vanished lieutenant chills the appetite." He chewed. "We will permit the intrusions necessary, but we will regulate them." That was Wolfe's way of saying, "Prepare the cattle chute and polish the gate." On the other side of lunch, he had me ring Confluos and inform them of our intent to invade. I got Kieran Duval, who sounded like he kept his voice on a leash. He promised to bring whoever I wanted to the brownstone at 3, including Ms. Crane if she could be wrestled from a strategy session. I said 4. Wolfe likes a buffer between digestion and strangers. At 3:20, a car door clapped out front like a metronome for impatience. I beat it to the stoop and held the door for a quartet that would have looked at home on a poster for "Come Taste Conflict." The lead was a willowy brunette with a precise step and the expression of someone who orders the ocean to be quiet. when she takes a call. That was Lydia Crane. She wore black that made a racket just by existing, and sunglasses that said, "I won something and I'll win again." Behind her, Kieran Duval had the square shoulders of a man who planned everything 3 ways and hated improvisation. Zadie drifted behind, pale and exhausted, a powdered sugar fingerprint on her dark blouse, eyes quick and tired. Eduardo was last on the file, a thick forearm tattooed with a rosary and a face that tried to look blank and landed unwary. I led them to the office. Wolfe had adjusted the room by an inch. The red leather chair angled a degree more toward the door, the small yellow globe he sometimes used as a paperweight gliding closer to the left edge. These movements are not for decoration. Wolfe arranges rooms the way a chess player arranges pawns, not for their beauty, but their utility. He nodded once, a king acknowledging someone who had been allowed to witness the throne. Chairs were taken, and I settled at my desk with my notebook and the pen I use for liars. Wolfe didn't waste wattage on welcome. Mr. Verini believes his subordinate's disappearance is calculated sabotage. He credits the police with apathy. He has hired me. If any of you consent to waste my time, I will strangle this engagement in its cradle. That is all. He folded his hands. Crane removed her sunglasses with a neat click. Calculated sabotage, she said, tasting the phrase like a sommelier. I prefer operational disruption. It sounds less melodramatic. Her voice had the sheen of a podcast and the blade of a letter opener. I'm here because I want this resolved yesterday. Confluo is a brand with momentum, and momentum hates drama. If Marco walked out, I need to know why. If someone escorted him, I need to know who. Either way, we tighten. Duval didn't nod. He absorbed. Mr. Wolfe, he said, we've done the immediate checks. Staff lockers, alley, roof access, delivery logs. Our back gate key ring is in my office safe. Only 3 copies exist. Mine, Paolo's, and Miss Crane's. There's also a garbage compactor key. Different ring altogether. No sign of tampering. Marco leaving his phone is the part that makes me itch. He's old school, keeps numbers in a pocket notebook. If he ran, he took that and his knives. Ah, Wolfe said as if someone had refreshed his drink. The notebooks. Mr. Goodwin. On it. I jotted pocket notebook and underlined twice. I don't get sentimental about notebooks, but I respect any tool that has grease on the cover and a man's livelihood inside. Zadie laced and unlaced her fingers, studying a crack in the air. Marco wouldn't run. He's stubborn and proud and a pain, yes, but he wouldn't abandon service. She looked up and her voice picked up a little heat. Somebody wanted to hurt us on purpose. We've had visits. Wolfe twitched. He doesn't like ellipses unless he's the one applying them. Visits, he repeated. Competitors, Duval said, as if clarifying a recipe. A new place up the block, Cardinal and Rye. They send their people in to eat, but mostly to count. A blogger who used to praise us now takes pot shots about inconsistent pacing and overdone theatrics. And last week a health inspector came twice in 5 days. We passed, but I don't believe in coincidences when there's money at stake. Crane cut a small smile on her mouth. Restaurants are long cons built on short margins, she said. Everyone has a friend who can twist a valve. The question is who benefits from Marco's absence. He's the backbone of the line. We can limp without him for 3 nights, but not 3 weeks. The rumor mill will turn, and I don't pay rent for mills. I asked the natural, who had it in for Marco personally. Eduardo shifted, then decided to commit. He was hard, he said, as a boss. He cut you down to make you fit the plate, but he wasn't bad. He watched the meat like it was a saint. If somebody messed with his knives, he would notice from across the room. Last night he was more quiet. When he sent me to the walk-in for hanger steaks, I saw his knife roll was half open. He never leaves it like that. Half open how? I said. The flap unsnapped. One slot empty. He traced the memory with his hand, and I could see it reflected. 8 knife slots, 1 dark gap. What slot? Wolfe asked. Boning knife, Eduardo said. 6-inch. He used it when the steak delivery had extra fat. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said. Note. An emptiness. I did. When Wolfe labels a vacuum, it's because he expects it to suck in the right debris. We chewed through the schedule, minute by minute. Service flowed from midnight to 2. Zadie plated desserts for tables 13 and 9 at 2:05. Duval reset the pass at 2:10 and approved a comped cheese course for table 6, an influencer accustomed to tribute. A courier dropped off an envelope at 2:14. No one opened it until after 2:30. It contained proofs for next week's menu cards. At 2:15, Marco left the line to check a delivery number in the office ledger. The back door alarm's 2 pings put him in the alley 2 minutes later. No cameras. The city had elected to protect privacy on that stretch by not funding any. If you want a disappearance, pick a block no one loves. Wolfe let the silence sit like a heavy lid. Then he lifted it. Mr. Duval, bring me the ledger, the duty rosters, and a list of every customer seated past 1 o'clock for the last 4 nights. Ms. Crane, provide a list of your investors and their holdings that intersect with your competitors. If you balk, I will return your retainer. Crane's shoulders tensed, then loosened. You will have them, she said. Our cap table is clean, but the market is a dirty sink. She turned to me. You'll also want to talk to the blogger. Heliotrope. They were a booster until they weren't. They dine alone and pretend not to take notes, which is adorable. Heliotrope, Wolfe repeated, tasting the word like basil. A flower that turns to the sun, and yet shadows lengthen. He closed his eyes for a beat. Mr. Goodwin, arrange for Mr. Panza to observe Cardinal and Rye this evening. Their purchases, their refuse, their staff's habits. Also speak to the inspector's office to learn who requested 2 visits in 5 days and who signed them. There is always a clerk, and clerks like to talk when their lunch is late. I was halfway to my feet when Fritz appeared with a tray and the sovereignty of a man who decides things. Coffee for our guests was poured, and a small plate of almond tuiles materialized in front of Crane, who regarded them like a treaty she hadn't authorized. Wolfe doesn't serve sweets during business unless he wants tongues loose. It works. As cups clinked, I felt it. The brownstone's air, which usually sits at the temperature of a contented cat, was different. Outsiders scuffed the rug's nap and filled the corners with their smells. Citrus cologne, kitchen heat, leftover night. Wolfe's gaze moved minutely from face to face, weighing inflection, cataloguing blink rates. The sanctity of his space had been disturbed, and he was letting them register that fact. I've seen men confess for less. Duval, who had been careful with his words, spilled a few. There's one more thing, he said. It may be nothing. At 1:45, the cellar door, inside by the dry storage, was ajar. I closed it. I assumed someone grabbed a sack of flour and forgot to latch. Assumptions, Wolfe said, are the fungus of management. Who had the duty on dry storage? Lucky, Zadie said softly. The dishwasher. He runs the late stock check while the last plates come back. He's trying. He needed the job. Marco kept him in line. Find Lucky for me, Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said. Bring him here tonight at 7. If he is unwilling, persuade him with cash. If he is unable, learn who made him unable. I want his eyes on this room. Crane stood, smoothing the air as if it were a skirt. You'll have what you asked for within the hour, she said, sliding her sunglasses back up the bridge of her nose. Please achieve a result quickly. The narrative is getting away from us. That is precisely what we shall not allow, Wolfe said. Good day. I escorted them down, clocking the frictions. Crane's impatience nipping at Duval's caution, Zadie's worry hitching to Eduardo's defensive loyalty. In the front hall, Crane paused near the rack and turned to me. I read about Mr. Wolfe's methods. He sits, everyone else runs. Do you ever wish he'd pick up his own feet? Every day, I said, opening the door. But then I'd be out of job and he'd miss lunch. When the latch clicked, the brownstone exhaled. I returned to the office. Wolfe had not shifted, but the yellow globe had inched right toward the corner of his desk where he keeps the letter opener he never uses. He cracked one eye. The investor is vigorous, he said. Vigor is admirable until it is ravenous. Mr. Goodwin, the alley needs your shoes, the cellar needs your nose, and Mr. Panzer needs his cue. Saul will love counting trash on a midnight block, I said, picking up the phone. It's his idea of romance. Piffle, Wolfe said. Saul makes courtship with facts. I called Saul, who agreed to lurk outside Cardinal and Rye until the rats came for their midnight constitutional. Then I rang Duval to get an address for Lucky and to arrange the documents. He promised the ledger and rosters by messenger within an hour, which in restaurant time is a miracle explained by fear. At 4:30, a bicycle courier brought an envelope that felt too light for its importance. Inside, the ledger pages, last 4 weeks, copies of the closing checklists, a sketch of the back-of-house layout with red X's for cameras and circles for blind spots, and a note in Duval's neat block letters. We found this on Marco's station after service last week. Thought it was a dumb quote. Now not so sure. The attached scrap was torn from an order pad. In a careful, blocky hand, someone had written, "The night belongs to those who arrive quietly." I carried it to Wolfe, who lifted it between 2 fingers like a dead bee. He said, "Pomposity travels in packs." He set it aside. "Go, Archie, bring me Lucky, and return with the stink of that alley in your clothes. I want to know whether it is ordinary stink or curated." I took my hat, my notebook, the scrap of philosophy, and the address. As I reached the hall, Fritz's voice floated from the dining room. "Mr. Goodwin, you will be back by 7. There is sweetbread, and it abhors neglect." "If it comes to a fight," I told him, "I'll defend it with my life." Then I was out the door, headed downtown to where a chef had vanished after midnight and a restaurant's heartbeat had hiccuped. The brownstone had been disturbed, and the pulse would not settle until Wolfe decided it could. The evening air downtown had the flavor of hot iron and last night's ambitions, which is what you get when restaurants and clubs fight for the same square foot of sidewalk. Confluo sat shy of the corner, its window glass reflecting a row of street trees that were pretending to be Paris. I did the walk through a cop learns by instinct. Look at the block as a single organism, then narrow to the capillaries. Cardinal and Rye glowed 2 doors down with brass inigo. A host in suspenders leaned on the podium like it had trained him. I made a note to send Saul a text about the garbage schedule. Theirs, not the city's. Inside Confluo, the dining room was a set at rest. Tables were stripped to their bones, a few chairs inverted like bats, and the bar backlit to keep the ghosts comfortable. A junior staffer with a broom stared at me as if I were a new health code. I held up a card and said I was looking for the general manager or the dishwasher, and in that order, only because Wolfe had already eaten. Duval appeared from the back like a man who had practiced the route. He had lost the tie and gained a forearm tattoo I hadn't seen under the cuff. It read, "Mise en place," in a font that would disappoint his mother. "Ledger arrived?" he asked, low enough that the walls couldn't hear. "And the poem," I said, showing him the scrap with the night owlish sentiment. "You get many literary stalkers." "Chef types," he said with a shrug that filed the matter under occupational hazards. "We collect aphorisms the way fishermen collect hooks. Some bite." "Lucky?" I asked. "In the dish pit. There's no service until 9 tonight. The crew's reprepping." He led me through the swing door into the noise that never stops talking. The hum of refrigeration, the breath of a hood, metal making small arguments with other metal. The line was clean, too clean, like a hotel room waiting to be messed. Someone had polished the station lamps to distract themselves from thinking about what wasn't there. Lucky had a neck like a stack of doughnuts and hands that had earned their nicks. He looked up from a rack of sheet pans, and his eyes did the calculation men do when they've had experience with questions that lead to rooms with one chair and a fluorescent light. "I didn't do nothing," he said on reflex. "Terrific," I told him. "We can skip that part. I'm Archie Goodwin. You're coming uptown to talk to Mr. Wolfe at 7. Before we put you in a cab and deny you the pleasure of the subway, I want your version of last night's ending." He shot a glance past me, but Duval had melted away with the discretion of a head waiter. Lucky braced. I was closing dry. Chef Marco sent me to count the capers and the anchovies. We were low on capers. I took the cellar key from the hook, went down, grabbed 2 jars, came up. I saw the cellar door was open a crack later when I took out trash, so I closed it. "That's it." "Time?" I asked. He took the wristwatch off his belt loop and checked a memory there. "Round 2, 10 past. Then Chef yelled for fish towels. I went. Mr. Kieran told me to mop at 1:55 before the barback dumped ice. I dumped trash at 2:10. That's when I closed the cellar." "Who else uses the cellar?" "Chef, me, sometimes Eduardo when he needs vinegar, Zadie for flour, Mr. Kieran for wine. The lock's stiff. You gotta lift and push." He wiped his hands. "You think Chef's down there?" The bravado withered at the end of the question, and there it was, the little kid under the beard stubble. "No," I said. "If he were, you wouldn't be hearing me. Tell me about the back door." "It sticks," he said. "The alarm's old. You gotta elbow the button. Delivery guys hate it. Chef could do it with his hip while holding a box." I looked at the hook board where the keys hung, each tag stamped like a dog's collar. Cellar, dumpster, office, walk-in, back gate. The back gate hook was empty, which did not reassure me. Duval reappeared with a clipboard. "Mine," he said, "going home with me. Ms. Cranes keeps a spare in a coded lockbox by her desk. Paolo has the third, usually in his jacket, which is upstairs in his office." "Show me," I said. Marco's office was a rectangle the size of Wolfe's smallest bookcase and twice as cluttered. A white jacket hung from a hook with an attitude that claimed it would be worn again. The desk held a ledger, a pencil sharpener that looked like it had been a toy in a previous life, and a charger with an empty cord that told the truth about the missing phone. In the bottom drawer sat a coffee tin that hadn't seen coffee in a while. I lifted the lid. It was full of steel wool pads and a packet of silica gel. When you care about knives, you care about rust. The knife roll wasn't there, but a leather thong that tied it had fallen behind the chair. I pocketed it for Wolfe. He likes artifacts. "Any cameras in the alley?" I asked. "Block committee voted no a year ago," Duval said. "Some of the bars prefer plausible deniability." "Bless democracy," I said. "Let's go to the crack in civilization." We stepped out the back. The alley was the kind where a novice smoker becomes a lifer. Damp, a sliver of sky, and secrets in the corners. The alarm box near the door was the color of old gum and chirped just to prove it could. I pressed the button. It gave me a millisecond of respect before beeping in protest. The dumpster sat like a throne, flanked by a compost bin with more self-esteem than contents. The gate at the far end was honest steel, with an old paint job and the kind of lock you inherit when the landlord's cousin knows a guy. I walked the 30 feet like I was reading a diary. The ground told a story. Black grease lacework, a cigarette brand that likes dancers, a galaxy of salt thrown by a man who doesn't know that salt and steel are enemies. At the halfway mark, I knelt and smelled the air the way Wolfe would if he could be bothered. Sanitizer fought garlic to a draw. Fish had been slaughtered nearby, but not here. And under it all, something that wasn't kitchen standard. Anise and something floral. I turned to Lucky. "Anybody out here wearing new cologne?" He looked insulted. We can't afford cologne. Then one of last night's visitors decided to audition for a soap commercial in the wrong room, I said. I moved to the gate and tested the lock. It held. The hinge had a halo of fresh shine, not from oil, but from friction. Someone had opened it with a key or gotten impatient with the hinge and a shoulder. Checked the bricks beside the gate and found a smear at 5 feet. Grey, not grease, like someone scraped a canvas bag or a coarse coat. I put 2 fingers to it. Grit. There was a thin film higher up, too, barely there, as if a hand had steadied itself. Lucky cleared his throat. Chef would lean there when he smoked. Chef smoked where nobody could see it, Duval corrected, his voice neutral. But he used the middle of the alley. He didn't crowd the gate. I traced back to the door. Slow. The door frame had a nick that wasn't there to match anything. Fresh, bright wood, half the size of a dime at knee height. Something had kissed it hard. A rolled knife bag hitting the jamb, or a shoe. The alarm box face had a hairline scratch that ran north to south at the corner. I looked at the screws. One was a cousin, not a sibling. The head was different. I took a thumbnail to the edge and felt gumminess. Someone had opened the box recently and did the kind of job a man does in a hurry with a replacement he found on the floor. "Mr. Duval," I said, "who repairs your alarm when it coughs?" "Vendor," he said, naming a company that services half the city. "They came 3 weeks ago. Button stuck." "Get me the work order," I said, "and the tech's name. Also find out if anyone called them since." Lucky had been quiet. He bent, squinted at the ground near the threshold, and touched a speck. "This wasn't here yesterday," he said, voice small. On the concrete sat a grain that caught the light like a rumor. I picked it up. It was green, not caper green or paint green, more like bottle glass that had been ground into a seed. I rolled it between fingers. It left a whisper of scent. Anise again, and something sweet. Zadie's territory. We went back in, and I detoured to pastry. Zadie was hand-whisking a sabayon with the kind of focus you bring to bomb defusal. "I'm not here to mess your air," I said, "but do you use anise in anything that would shed green glitter in an alley?" She blinked, then smiled without humor. "Pistachio anise praline dust. We sprinkle it on the ricotta bomboloni for the late seating." She pointed to a hotel pan with a sheet of parchment carrying a faint green snow. "Why?" "It's on the ground by the back door, after service." I watched her pupils go inward and come back with a file folder. "We prep it in pastry. It should never be in the alley," she said. "Unless somebody took a plate out to smoke, which they know not to do, or—" She stopped. "Or unless someone dusted something in the alley." "Like what?" I asked. "A plate," she said. "Or a bag. It's sticky. It clings." I let that sit. "Who plated bomboloni after 2? 9 got theirs at 2:05, she said. 13 at 2:10. The influencer table 6 refused dessert. Calories are earned in other ways. We sent the kitchen staff a plate at 2:20, if that counts." "It counts," I said. "Who carried it?" "Eduardo," she said, frowning. "He said Marco needed sugar." I found Eduardo at the grill laying out steaks with the tenderness of a man putting babies down for naps. "You took a dessert to Marco at 2:20, I said. "You give it to him?" He shook his head slowly. "I set it on his station," he said. "He was in the office. I went back to the line. When I looked later, the plate was gone. He must have taken it." "You dust it in the alley?" I asked. He looked genuinely offended. "We don't waste sugar," he said. Then he thought, and irritation pulled his mouth right. "Zadie dusted it. I carried it, but I went out to smoke right after, in the alley. There was sweet smell, like—" "Praline," I supplied. He nodded, uneasy now that his senses were co-signing someone else's deposit. I stepped into the office again and looked at the desk with new glasses. The blotter had a faint ring, the size of a small plate. The ring wasn't coffee. It sparkled when I leaned it toward the light. I rubbed it. Green grit came away on my finger. Marco's chair had the same freckles on the right armrest. He had eaten, or someone had fed him, a dessert dusted with a powder that clings like a loyal dog. He had then gone through the back, taking that dust with him. I called Wolfe. He answered as if the phone had interrupted a treaty. I gave him the bullet points: alarm box tampered and re-screwed, hinge shine, gate smear, green praline dust at threshold and in the office, and a scent in the alley that didn't belong to soap but persisted like a signature. He said. We have a trespass and a confection. The trespass is practical. The confection is theatrical. The conjunction is deliberate. Lucky's clean, I added. Nervous, but his timeline holds water. Zadie is worried in a way that comes from caring about Flower. Eduardo is defensive in a way that comes from caring about Marco. And Mr. Duval? Wolfe asked. A manager who believes closets are for brooms, not secrets. He'll deliver the alarm work order. He's also a man who counts keys in his sleep. And the investor? On the warpath. Good, he said. War makes footprints. Before I could invent a quip worth the phone charge, he went on, Bring me a sample of that dust in your clothes. And fetch Mr. Lucky. Mr. Panzer reports that Cardinal and Rye discards vacuum-sealed hanger steak trimmings in neat parcels, and that someone in their kitchen smokes Gauloises, which is vulgar. He will watch the transfer dock at 10. Anybody tailing you there? I asked, out of habit. Saul hates surprises except the edible ones. Possibly, Wolfe said, and I could hear the mild satisfaction of a man who has arranged for a tale to see what he wants them to see. Proceed. I pocketed a folded parchment square of the green dust, taped and labeled courtesy of Zadie, and told Duval I was borrowing his dishwasher for an hour of culture. Lucky balked, then accepted a 20 as philosophy. On our way out, I detoured one more time into the alley and looked up. A second-floor window above the back stretch was open 2 inches, a black slit with a cheap chain. The wall below wore a faint, darker streak, as if steam or breath had climbed it. I noted the window's location relative to the dining room. It would put you over the private party alcove. Sound carries in weird ways in old buildings. Maybe someone had wanted to listen to a kitchen without stepping in it. We hit the street. Lucky shuffled like a man who expects to be returned, dented. At the corner, traffic hiccuped, and a guy in a navy jacket that was trying too hard to be forgettable pretended to take a photo of his shoes. I looked right at him, smiled, and put an arm around Lucky like I was a social worker with better hair. The man looked away so fast his ears flapped. Friend of yours? Lucky asked. Depends, I said. If he follows us, he likes my company more than I do. I got us a cab, because the subway would give our friend too many doors, and told the driver to aim uptown. By the time we hit 34th, Lucky had told me his version of Marco twice. A tough boss who didn't like waste. A quiet guy who called his knives by their first names and had a joke about capers that probably killed at chef parties. A man who had put a hand on Lucky's shoulder once when a plate returned and the world was closing in. He said, "We fix," Lucky murmured, as if tasting it again. Not you fix. We. I looked at the green flecks on my fingertip and thought about theatre and trespass, about a gate with a shine and an alarm box reborn with a mismatched screw, about a quote scribbled on an order pad by a hand that wanted to be remembered for more than food. The city slid by in layers of light. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe would want to smell my jacket and taste the dust and watch Lucky's pupils under the lamp's warm disgrace. The brownstone had been disturbed. Now it would disturb back. And somewhere between a sugared plate and a hinge that squealed for attention, someone had arranged a vanishing at 2:20 in the morning with the neatness of a mise en place. Relax, I told Lucky as the cab turned onto our block, which is the sort of lie a man tells when he's about to open the door to Nero Wolfe's office. He only bites if you waste his time. Do I smell like dishes? He asked. You smell like work, I said. He's allergic to that, but we'll try not to rub it on him. Lucky sat in the red leather chair like a man who expected springs and pins to pop out of it and finish what the courts had never managed. He was sweating into his shirt collar, shifting every 2 seconds, but Wolfe hadn't said a word yet. The silence in that room is a tool. I've seen it peel bark off grown men. Fritz had set out, beer and cheese for Wolfe, and left with the quiet dignity of someone who'd never allow a dishwasher's perspiration to sour the camembert. I leaned on the edge of my desk, notebook open, letting the silence work while Wolfe studied Lucky as if he were some rare beetle trapped under glass. Finally, Wolfe exhaled, slow. Your name is an abomination, he said, eyes still shut, but your testimony may be tolerable. Begin. Lucky's Adam's apple jumped like a boy on a diving board. I told him already, he mumbled, flicking his eyes at me. You will tell me, Wolfe said, shifting just enough to suggest that repetition was not optional. So Lucky went through it again, the dry storage, the capers, the cellar door open and later closed, the mop, the trash, the time around 2 when Marco left his post. He stumbled on details, then circled back, then tripped again. Every time he faltered, Wolfe cut in, not to scold, but to pin. At what angle was the door ajar? Wolfe would ask. Or, was the mop head fresh or used? Questions so particular they forced Lucky to crawl through his own memory like a man on hands and knees. The net effect was that by the time Lucky finished, the story had been scrubbed of dust. It still held. His times lined with the alarm record. His description of the cellar door matched what I'd seen. He didn't have the muscle or the nerve for tampering with alarm boxes, and if he had tried to carry Marco out, we'd still be peeling him off the alley bricks. When Lucky finally stopped, he looked like a man who had confessed his sins, and maybe a few he hadn't even committed. Wolfe leaned back, eyelids heavy. You're excused, he said. Mr. Goodwin will see you out. Collect your wages and do not wander. If you are touched, I will know. Lucky started, touched. By temptation, Wolfe said, eyes snapping open for the first time. There is a difference between being useless and being complicit. You're not clever enough for the second. Keep it that way. That did it. Lucky bobbed his head so hard I thought it might roll, and I guided him to the front door. When I came back, Wolfe had the parchment of praline dust between his fingers, turning it toward the light. He held it close to his nose, then away, then let it fall on a white plate Fritz had delivered for that purpose. Against the porcelain, the dust glittered like ground emeralds. A confectionery intrusion, Wolfe murmured. Unnecessary for sustenance, entirely for effect. It lingers on cloth, resists erasure, carries scent. Theatrical, as I said. I gave him the rest, the scratch on the alarm box, the mismatched screw, the smear on the gate, the open second-floor window. He listened, only once interrupting with a grunt, when I mentioned the scent of anise that didn't belong to any detergent. Anise, he said, eyes half shut again. Favored by charlatans to disguise their stench. Which one's the charlatan? I asked. Patience, he said. It will emerge. The doorbell rang. Fritz padded in with the quiet glide of a man bringing not supper but suspects. It was Duval, right on cue, carrying a folder of documents and a face that suggested he hadn't slept since Marco vanished. He laid the folder on Wolfe's desk like an offering. Roster, duty logs, customer list past 4 nights, he said, and the alarm service work order. Technician name is Carl Minetti. Same guy who did it last time. Thank you, Wolfe said without looking up. Sit. Duval sat, straight-backed, as if awaiting inspection. Wolfe flipped through the pages at his own pace, which is slower than erosion but more thorough. Finally, he stopped at the customer list. Who is this? He asked, tapping a name. Duval leaned. Alonzo Vale, food critic, writes for Metro Table. And this? Wolfe tapped again. Rosa Liddell, owner of Cardinal and Rye. She came 3 nights ago, sat at table 9. Ah, Wolfe shut the folder with a snap. And what did she order? Duval frowned, digging in memory. The midnight menu. Full. She lingered at the pass, complimented the plating, asked to speak to Marco. He declined. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. Declined. He closed them. How did she respond? Smiled, Duval said. Too much. I jotted a note. Wolfe tapped the parchment with the dust. Mr. Vale, Mr. Liddell, Mr. Minetti, Mr. Goodwin, tomorrow you will speak with them. Tonight, however, I want Mr. Panzer's observations of Cardinal and Rye and the refuse they discard. Call him? I rang Saul, who reported from a payphone 2 blocks from the rival's kitchen dock. His voice was dry as chalk. They dump neat vacuum packs of hanger steak at midnight sharp. Same cut Confluo specializes in. And get this, their pastry chef smokes cloves laced with anise. I watched her crush one under her heel. Her name? Wolfe demanded over my shoulder. Celeste Ray, Saul said. Ex-Confluo, 6 months back. Left in a huff. I hung up. Wolfe's mouth curved, the closest thing to a grin he gets. Celeste Ray sprinkles anise like breadcrumbs. Very well. He shifted, a monumental effort. The saboteur reveals herself in fragments, not yet whole. We proceed. Duval cleared his throat. Mr. Wolfe, if this is Cardinal and Rye. It is not Cardinal and Rye, Wolfe cut him off. It is someone using their orbit. That is different. The investor, Ms. Crane, is vigorous. She will press for a swift resolution, but swiftness is the enemy of clarity. You will restrain her. That sounded like asking a terrier to restrain itself from biting the mailman, but Duval nodded. When he left, Wolfe and I were alone again. He lifted his glass of beer, sipped, and finally spoke. Archie, note this. A man vanishes not with silence, but with noise disguised as silence. The praline dust, the scribbled motto, the tampered alarm, all ornaments. The true action lies underneath. Tomorrow we strip the ornament and find the kernel. That was Wolfe's way of saying the circle of suspects was closing, and mine, as always, was the job of putting on shoes. Fritz fortified me with eggs and a roll that had seen butter applied with diplomatic immunity. Wolfe was already in the plant rooms. Orchids get his morning before any human does. At 9:30 he descended and let me brief him while beer thought about being poured. Lucky holds. Duval delivered. Saul sniffed anise and French cigarettes at Cardinal and Rye. The hinge shone. The alarm box had a cousin screw. The office blotter sparkled like a cheap tiara. I tapped my notebook. You wanted Minetti, Vale, and Liddell. I'll start with the one who carries a screwdriver for a living. Proceed, he said, and closed his eyes again, which never means he's done listening. Minetti kept a van on 10th with the company name stenciled in a font that belonged to a decade no one misses. He had the build of a man who moves ladders alone and the skeptical eyes of a man who has discovered no one ever accurately describes the noises their machinery makes. I introduced myself and showed him a photo of the alarm box I'd taken with my phone, with a close-up of the objectionable screw. That's not ours, he said, no hesitation. We use Torx heads on the faceplates so the amateurs go by the wrong driver and give up. That's a Phillips. Somebody swapped it. Your work order says you were there 3 weeks ago, I told him. Anyone call you since? He fished a battered tablet from under a seat, stabbed at it with a finger that had outlived softer screens, and found the entry. Confluo. Button was sticking. I cleaned it, replaced the spring, swapped the faceplate because the old one had hairline cracks around the mount. No call since. He looked up. We get nuisance calls. People ask how to quiet down the chirp because it bothers the guests. We don't tell them squat. You want the incoming log? I love nothing more than reading other people's bad decisions, I said. He printed me a sheet that smelled like death by toner. One number, the afternoon before Marco vanished, had called the service line and hung up after 6 rings. The company didn't answer unknowns after hours. Voicemail takes it. The voicemail was 30 seconds of air and a click. The number had a Midtown exchange. You recognize it? I asked. He shook. Phones are phones. But if you have a faceplate with a wrong screw, someone opened it who didn't plan to put it back right. Could your tech have been moonlighting? I said. He barked a laugh. To swap one screw? If a tech moonlights, you'll get a whole new panel and a cash receipt tucked under it. Number this says a nervous person with a kitchen knife and a Home Depot bag. I thanked him and left with the printout. Outside, a navy jacket admired a storefront and admired me on the rebound. I gave him a half smile. He pretended to notice pigeons. It was the same man from last night, and he had a surveillance posture they teach in the kind of school where passing involves never getting caught. I let him have the sidewalk and walked 2 blocks the wrong way so he could earn his per diem. Then I cut into a coffee shop, out the back, and came around behind him. He blinked when I appeared on his starboard side, which is the highest compliment our profession offers. You're going to sprain something if you keep looking at your shoes that hard, I told him. I don't know what you mean, he said, which is a sentence that reads guilty in any language. Who do you like better, me or my employer? I asked. Because I can sign autographs, but he won't stand up. He looked pained. It isn't like that, he said. I'm just gathering. Freelancer gig 4. He dithered, and I gave him a look I practice in the mirror. Heliotrope, he said finally, and exhaled his shame. The blogger. They pay for eyes on kitchens. Wanted to know who Vareni runs to when things go sideways. Tell them he runs to a chair on West 35th, and that chair runs the city, I said. And stop wasting your ankles. If you keep following me, I'll have you spending your evening counting rats with a man who thinks facts are romance. He took the hint. I kept going. Alonso Vale, food critic, kept a narrow office over a bookstore that sold both cookbooks and theology, which tells you either he has taste or the landlord does. He had long fingers, clean spectacles, and the slight pallor of a man who eats late and writes later. Mr. Goodwin, he said, indicating a chair that had no patience for bulk. You're quicker than my editors. We have sharper incentives, I said. You dined at Confluo the night before last. Midnight seating. He tapped an imaginary metronome on the desk. Table 4. The menu was all theatre until course 3, which was opera. Then the lights flickered. The pacing, not the bulbs. Something faltered. The line regained itself by course 5, but the chef's attention had shifted. He refused a table visit. That's atypical. Marco usually allows 1 beau. He assigns his disdain artfully. You saw who he refused? Owner of Cardinal and Rye, Vale said dry. She introduced herself to the host as if the place required credentials. I noted the name because she sent back a plate she had half finished, which is unpardonable unless there's glass in it. There wasn't. The plate was fine. She wanted attention. Perfume? I asked. I wish diners would eat with their mouths and not their sleeves, he said. But no, not on her. On someone else. A niece, artificial. It hung in the air like a monologue. And there was an envelope. A courier dropped it at the pass at 2:14. Tasting menu proof. I saw the brand watermark when the EE. Manager opened it later. I'm a magpie. You read everything, I said. I make a living catching what other people toss, he said. You're looking for motive. Food, as ever, offers plenty. Money, pride, fear of irrelevance, and... He fished his phone from a drawer and scrolled. Here. Heliotrope's post 2 days ago. Confluo's midnight menu has lost its nerve. Caption from an anonymous tip. The night belongs to those who arrive quietly. It's a nasty little motto. It wants to be poetry when it's just a threat in a tuxedo. The same words we had on the scrap. He slid the phone across. The anonymous tip had come from a burner handle at Night Belongs. The photo was a shadowed shot of Confluo's pass. In the corner, if you squinted, a dusting of green on a plate winked. "Heliotrope dine that night?" I asked. "They dine always," he said. "They also lurk. I don't begrudge the hustle, but their tone has shifted. They used to be house cat sweet on Varani. Lately they've grown claws." We finished with one last useful bit. Vale had chatted afterward with a courier who liked to gossip. The courier said Confluo was on a rush to print new menu cards because an investor had insisted on changing dish names to be more shareable. He rolled his eyes when he said it. I didn't write the eye roll, but I saw Wolfe arch an eyebrow in my head. Rosa Lydell took me at 2 in a side room at Cardinal and Rye that had been decorated by a person who collected bare light bulbs as a personality. She wore confidence like a shawl, cheap or expensive depending on the light. "You want me to say I sabotaged Confluo," she said, smiling because she disliked being predictable. "I want you to talk until you say something true," I said. "Start anywhere." She poured herself water from a bottle that had been priced for the label. "I went to Confluo because I like seeing what Paolo is trying to be. He's trying to be European without the manners. It works when he leans into simplicity. I asked to speak to Marco because I respect talent. He declined. I can live with that. I sent back a plate because it was oversalted, not because I wanted a show. If I wanted drama, I'd buy a network." "Your pastry chef smokes clover nice," I said. "Celeste does many things I wish she wouldn't," she said, without blinking. "She also makes a rye tart people dream about in languages they don't speak. If Celeste sprinkled her perfume in Paolo's alley, she'll answer to me." "Did she work for Confluo?" "For 8 months, left when Miss Crane redecorated the pastry program into slogans." "Celeste is not a slogan," Rosa said. "The name Crane came with a scrape. If you're looking for someone who would manipulate an alarm box, you're looking at the wrong house. My people don't need to shove. We're booked for 3 weeks." "Health inspector came to Confluo twice last week," I said. "Anonymous. Complaints," she said. "Always the same time, always the same phrasing. Odd odor near back door." She tilted her head. "Our back door also has odors. That's what backs of restaurants are for. Miss Crane has a taste for war. She tried to poach my bar director with a signing bonus shaped like a Tesla. Don't look at me for your villain. Look at whoever benefits if Paolo looks sloppy. Investors hate sloppiness because it isn't pitchable." "Who benefits if Marco disappears?" I asked. "Marco?" she said, which was unexpected enough that she got my full face. The myth of the vanished genius. Nothing cements a brand like a mystery. I don't accuse. I simply note that chefs have egos that could heat a building and occasionally decide to write their own legend. If I had a nickel for every time a person gave me an explanation that would keep them out of court and stir up magazine copy, I could buy Wolfe a larger chair. Still, I asked the last thing that mattered. "Do you smoke Gauloises?" I asked, because Saul's nose had mentioned it. "I don't smoke anything," she said. "The cook on my fish station does. I tell him to stop. He nods like a saint. And then his apron smells like Paris at 2 a.m. You can write him a ticket if it makes you feel useful." It didn't. But it told me Saul's nose was on. Back on the street, the navy jacket had cycled away or dissolved. I took a cab uptown with a parcel of Ennis dust in my pocket, the Manetti log in my inside coat, and the feeling you get when threads start to twist into rope. Wolfe listened, motionless, while I set it out. Minetti's Torque's Head, the Midtown hang-up, Vale's Anise and the heliotrope caption with the same motto as our scrap, Rosa's denial and her throwing a shadow at Miss Crane, and her suggestion that a self-authored myth isn't out of bounds in a city that sells them by the yard. "The alarm," he said when I was done, "was opened by a person with neither the proper tool nor the proper patience, and resealed badly. The purpose was not to disable, but to control. Reduce the chirp, time the beeps, create a pocket of quiet. The window above the alley was opened a notch to permit either sound to egress or eavesdropping. There is a scrap with a motto copied onto it, and an image of the same motto laundered through that excrescence heliotrope. We have duplications, which are either carelessness or artistry. He sipped beer. Now, the number that called the vendor. Midtown. Where is Miss Crane's office? Midtown, I said. And Mr. Vale's office? Chelsea, I said. And Miss Liddell? Soho, I said. And heliotrope? He made the word taste like licorice gone bad. Not an address I can serve, I said. A P.O. box and a slack. Mr. Goodwin, he said, tone thin as a wire, do not insult me with internet patois. Find them. They smelled our air through that window. They quoted their ugly sentence into the world before their powder had settled on Mr. Verini's blotter. The cadence is wrong for cooks. It is right for someone who lives by captions. I made a note to find heliotrope in the flesh. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. As for Miss Crane, he said, she is vigorous, impatient, and ignorant of kitchens. She meddles. She would meddle with an alarm if she thought noise frightened patrons, and a quieter chirp would lengthen their cocktails by $17. Whether she did so herself or had a subordinate do it is irrelevant to its meaning. The trespass was in service of atmosphere. But the trespass made opportunity. Opportunity for what? I asked. To persuade Mr. Ballanty to walk into a pocket of quiet at 2:20, he said. A pocket where his absence would be hidden by planned sounds, a courier, a comped cheese, a dessert. I suspect he did not expect to vanish. I suspect he expected a confrontation. Who with? Wolfe looked at the ceiling, where he keeps his better thoughts until they behave. With someone who had written to him before. Someone who likes phrases and theatrics and who wished to meet at the back, under the window. Someone who needed the alarm to hush for exactly long enough to let a door close and a gate swing without the kitchen noticing its own heartbeat change. Heliotrope, I said. Perhaps, Wolfe allowed. Or a proxy. In any case, we will no longer allow others to pace us. Invite Miss Crane and Mr. Duval for 11 tomorrow. Invite Miss Liddell, which will please her. Invite Mr. Vale, who will pretend to be inconvenienced and be secretly delighted. Invite Mrs. Zadie and Mr. Eduardo, and bring me the blogger. Use any method short of kidnapping. And Marco? I asked, because someone had to. We will either have him, Wolfe said, or we will have the person who arranged for us not to. I do not intend to eat my sweetbreads under a cloud. He rang for Fritz and ordered coffee as if he had just conquered a province. I put in calls. Crane accepted in a tone that came with knives. Duval said yes, because he had run out of no. Vale sighed and marked it in his book with the same pen he uses to stab adjectives. Rosa said she'd come if she could bring a lawyer. I told her she could bring a marching band if they removed their hats. Zadie answered like a ghost and said, of course. Eduardo said, if it helps Chef, I come. The blogger took longer. I had to ask a barista who used to flirt with a baker who used to date a coder who set up Heliotrope's site. That got me a real name and a workspace address over a Pilates studio on 9th. I went down there and waited in a stairwell until a 30-something in a black beanie the weather didn't require came out with a tote that said, "Eat the rich, tip your server." We had a short conversation conducted in the international dialect of incentives. They would be there, anonymized ego and all. When I relayed this, Wolfe made the small noise that means his pieces had lined up on the board. Good, he said. Tonight, you will return to Confluo for the 9 o'clock seating. You will sit at the pass. You will watch who uses the cellar, who pats the alarm, who makes the praline dust migrate. You will also watch the upstairs window. And Saul? He will continue his romance with refuse, Wolfe said. And, Mr. Goodwin, on your way downtown, Stop at a hardware store and buy a Torx driver. The next time you see a Phillips head where there should be Torx, remove it. The person who put it there may have left you a message under the plate. Charlatans sometimes litter. He closed his eyes as if the matter bored him now that it was properly arranged. I took my hat in the city. If the plan worked, tomorrow Wolfe would have his room full of appetites, and we'd serve them a course they couldn't swallow. If it didn't, I would have a Torx screwdriver and an evening with a window that breathed secrets onto an alley where a chef had walked and not returned. I bought the Torx driver from a hardware store that smelled like dust and marriage, stuck it in my inside pocket, and let the city deliver me back to Confluo. The 9 o'clock seating had the energy of a train deciding whether it was on time, front of house smiling too hard, back of house pretending not to check the clock. Duval set me on a stool near the pass with a view of the swing door and the alley door beyond, which he claimed was a favor and which I knew was a test. If you place a man where he can see too much, you learn whether he can also see the right thing. The line worked in close formation. Eduardo handled heat like he believed in it. Zadie floated through with a tray of shells that were going to be cannoli after she had her say. The air had the domestic snarl of garlic and onions, plus the treble note of citrus, plus, fainter, our new friend Anise. Someone on the floor was wearing it, or someone's work had left fingerprints where it shouldn't. I let my eyes do their patient walk. Who touched what without needing to? Who glanced toward the back? Whose hands were too clean for this hour? At 9:40, a courier skated in, this one wound tighter than the last, and dropped a flat envelope at the host stand. Different vendor stamp on the corner, printing house, uptown. I watched Duval hold it like it might explode, then tuck it under his arm until a lull. When he opened it at the office door, the corner of a proof flashed silver in the light. He didn't notice the server who reached for a water pitcher had to step around him and had to step around the envelope, and that the server left a thumbprint on the flap. If you don't work for Wolfe, you don't notice that sort of thing. If you do, you feel the hair go up along your forearms. I asked for water and earned my keep by refilling 2 glasses at the pass while the staff sprinted. Plant yourself as furniture, and people forget your roots. The swing door breathed. Someone went out the back for a smoke. A minute later, the anise smell sharpened like a pencil. I stood, stretched as if my limbs had rights, and drifted to the shoulder of the alley door. The alarm button sulked on its bracket. The mismatched Phillips screw on the faceplate looked smug. I timed it for the kitchen's pivot, Zadie calling behind, a bus tub going out, a plate coming in, and put my body between the line and the alarm box. Torx out, 1 twist for the real screw, 2 for the imposter. The faceplate came free with the wheeze of adhesive that didn't want to let go. Inside, the spring Minetti had replaced sat proper, but someone had glued a felt square the size of a postage stamp to the inner face where the speaker mouths off. Not just any felt, sticky with a dust that glittered faintly green. My finger came away with a scent like a licorice salesman. I peeled the square loose, slid it into an evidence envelope I carry for moments like this, and had the plate back on, with the right screws, seated before the busser returned with an armful of glass, and a problem with gravity. "Buttons crooked," he said to no one, and no one answered, because crooked buttons are the wallpaper of restaurants. I went back to the stool and watched the line cut and sear and plate as if nothing in the back had ever been interesting. At 10:20, the upstairs window I'd clocked yesterday, 2 inches over the alley, a slit of black, opened another inch. You learn the posture of windows the way you learn the posture of liars. I slid off the stool and drifted into the dining room proper. The private alcove that lay under that window had a couple mid-proposal. Their faces were pointed at each other, so their ears were useless to anyone else. I looked up and saw nothing but darkness and a lopsided chain. The building's bones carried sound badly. A man could crouch up there and listen to a kitchen's pulse without needing to breathe loud. When I returned to the pass, a server in a black beanie I recognized from a stairwell on 9th was tasting a sauce and pretending to be on staff. Heliotrope. They had the stance of a chameleon and the eyes of a pelican. Take everything, digest later. They saw me the way prey sees a hole in the fence and slid away, toward the restrooms, toward the back hall. I let them go. Tomorrow Wolfe would have them where I could watch their hands tremble or not. Tonight, I wanted them to think their cloak still covered them. At 10:43, the swing door flapped and pinged once, soft as a question. The alarm box made half a sound and then reconsidered. A shadow crossed the alley door window. A shape, then gone. I moved. The alley had the same damp breath, but the gate at the far end wore a new decision. The hasp was resting against the staple with the lazy air of a thing not fully latched. The hinge catch had a new scratch, bright as gossip. I put 2 fingers on the bar, eased the gate an inch. Its weight shifted and clucked. Someone had been through and closed it like they planned to come back. Footsteps scuffed to my right. Not shoe leather, rubber, cautious. I flattened into the brick and smelled clove in the same second, a silhouette separated from the wall beside the dumpster. The person pivoted and cleared the first 10 feet with the speed of a habit. I could have followed and made a scene. Instead, I called Saul and described the stride, the jacket length, the route the block preferred. He grunted acknowledgement and broke into a trot on whatever roof he was currently romancing. 2 minutes later, he texted me a door, a loading bay on the cross street that fed a co-working loft. 9th Avenue, the same building where Heliotrope rented air. Satisfactions arrive on the hoof if you feed them right. Back in the kitchen, Zadie was plating the late desserts, the dustpan of pistachio anise at her elbow. She kept it tidy, but the powder has opinions and clung to the edge. I asked her for a pinch in a parchment square. "You won't like it on its own," she said. "I've eaten worse," I said, pocketing it next to the felt pad. It was the same tint, the same cling. At 11:12, Duval decided he had enough calm to look at the envelope proofs. He opened the office door, set the envelope on the desk, and lifted the flap with the care of a man disarming a boy's prank. I slipped in, came around the far side of the desk like I was admiring the chair, and got a look I wanted. A yellow post-it stuck to the inside of the flap, 3 words in a hand someone had tried to steady. Quieter back door. Below it, a midtown number without a name. The adhesive had a halo of green dust where someone's fingers had come from pastry to paper without a stop at the sink. Duval didn't see it. He slid the note into the trash with the flap when he flattened the envelope. I rescued both with the casual dexterity you develop the first time you keep evidence out of a janitor's path. By midnight, the dining room ran out of excuses and bills were paid. Eduardo stripped the line with the devotion of a man undressing someone he respected. Zadie wrapped the dust tight and labeled it the way a surgeon labels samples. The staff smoke break was a crouching cluster in the alley, and I caught a whisper from the window above, the kind of soft creak you get when someone shifts weight and regrets the floorboard selection. I let the alley swallow it. On my way out, I checked with Duval. "Any of your people go upstairs during service?" I asked, nodding toward the window. "Office storage," he said. "Chef Marco's old jacket closet and the file boxes that scare investors. It creaks. No one goes unless they have to." "Tonight someone had to," I said. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Heliotrope's here," he said, as if that explained any noise the building might make. "They've had a reservation every night this week, under different names. I don't mind coverage. I mind tone. They dine like undertakers." "Tomorrow you can watch them dine like defendants," I said, and left him to his ledger. Saul called as I hit the corner. "Your runner went up to the 9th Avenue loft," he said. "Walked like a person who knows which steps complain. They used a code on the side door a courier uses. I saw a light go on in a second-floor interior room, then off. Clove smoke out the second window. That's your pastry, love. Celeste, I said. Or someone wearing Celeste, he said. But they carry their right shoulder like they learned to lift 50-pound flour bags with only one good knee. He'd done his homework. I told him he could send it to Valentine. Come home, I said. Wolfe wants to smell my jacket and see if the green glitter makes him philosophical. He made a noise that was either a scent or an editorial. I hailed a cab and let Midtown's neon tell me I'd made choices. At the brownstone, Fritz had left hot broth as if he anticipated what the night required to be washed off. Wolfe had the yellow globe near the corner of his desk, which is his posture for deliver. I put down the felt square, the parchment dust, the post-it with its considerate advice, and the envelope flap with its halo of green. Wolfe sniffed each item like a botanist, then breathed out through his nose in a way that means he's privately insulted by inept craft. The felt, he said, pinching it like a bug. Prepared at the same station as the praline. Applied with fingers that then touched paper. The person who did this wanted to hush the beeper and to signal to themselves that the job was done. The post-it is gauche but informative. The handwriting strains to be neat. A manager's hand impersonated by a creative. Miss Crane would have sent an email. Mr. Duval would have written in block letters with a ruler. A blogger would have written something clever. This is neither. It is theater backstage. He lifted my jacket sleeve and brought it to his nose. Anise, he said, and cloves. The clove is secondary. Celeste, perhaps, if Mr. Panzer's romance is accurate. But clove travels. Anise here is the signature on every object we care about. He tapped the envelope flap. The number. Midtown Exchange, I said. Minetti had a hang-up. The advice to make the back door quieter was delivered, possibly through that vendor line, unsuccessfully. So it was enacted in-house with felt. Which unlocked a second convenience, Wolfe said, by creating a moment of hush in which a door opened and closed without calling a cook's attention. The pocket of quiet, you repeated. Very well. He set the felt down and rang for beer as if rewarding himself for tolerating adhesives. And the upstairs window? I asked. Observation, he said. A person who wished to hear the kitchen's cadence without being seen. A blogger, a rival, or a conspirator whose appetite for knowledge exceeded their appetite for heat. It is of interest only insofar as it indicates forethought. Forethought is a poor fit on spontaneous abduction. We are not in the domain of rage. We are in the domain of program. I gave him Saul's door and the clove smoke and the co-working loft. Wolfe's mouth tightened in what passes for satisfaction. Tomorrow, he said, we will end the program. You want any last-minute rain checks? I asked. Heliotrope has a beanie and a tote and a talent for stairs. Rosa asked to bring a lawyer and a lighting designer. Miss Crane will bring teeth. He closed his eyes. Let them bring their furniture. I will provide the room. He opened them again, and the tone sharpened. Archie, send a note to Miss Crane tonight. Ask her to bring the back gate key she keeps in her lockbox. And bring me Mr. Verini at the same hour with his jacket that usually holds his key. Keys confer and contradict. They will be eloquent. I made the calls. Crane's assistant promised the key with the frost of someone who manages calendars like weapons. Paolo answered himself. Voice scraped thin. He agreed to come, and he would bring the jacket, and he would bring whatever else Wolfe wanted if it meant hearing anything at all about Marco. When I hung up, Wolfe had the green dust on a white plate again, tilting it under the lamp. Theatrical, he said, almost to himself. We have been taunted with a sentence and a sparkle. Very well. We will answer with a paragraph. He let the room go quiet in that deliberate way he has, making silence behave like a force. The brownstone had been invaded by smells and words and strangers, and tomorrow it would play host not as a victim, but as a stage. In my pocket, The Torque's driver pressed against my ribs like a reminder of tools we use when other people make the wrong choices. Upstairs, orchids leaned toward humidity and refused to care about our narrative. I took the hint and called it a night. The city shut one eye. The other stayed open in the window over a back alley where a chef had stepped into a pocket of quiet and been persuaded to keep walking. Morning came with Fritz's rolls and Wolfe's mood calibrated to tolerant of civilization. By 10, he had settled into the red leather as if the chair had been grown around him, and I'd laid out our tableau on his desk, the felt square from the alarm box, the parchment of green dust, the post-it with "Quieter Back Door" in the Midtown number, and the envelope flap with the glitter halo. He studied them with the expression he reserves for orchids that insist on blooming in the wrong month. At 10:30, Saul phoned in a final postcard. Our runner with the clove signature exited the 9th Avenue loft at dawn with flower on one sleeve and a tote that had seen better slogans. He tailed them as far as a subway entrance and left them to the underground. He had also liberated a trash bag from Cardinal and Rye's dock and found a pastry-piping tip dusted with something that glimmered green under a street lamp. I gave Wolfe the précis. He grunted, which is praise. At 11 sharp, the doorbell announced the parade and the brownstone braced. Fritz ran the intake like a maitre d' at a club that doesn't take new members. Ms. Crane first, bright and edged, with a lockbox key on a fob that could have moored a yacht. Kieran Duval close behind with his manager's clipboard and a look that begged for a fire code to enforce. Rosa Liddell with a lawyer in tow who had the permanent smile of a man banking billable minutes. Zadie and Eduardo paired like siblings at a school principal's office. Alonzo Vale carrying a notebook and wearing the faintly embarrassed air of a man who has opinions for a living. And last, our anonymous gourmand, heliotrope, beanie stowed in a tote and hair brushed into plausible adulthood, eyes flicking with the speed of an indexer. Paolo arrived at the stroke of the hour. -2, older by a week than when I'd met him, carrying the white jacket that usually held his back gate key. Wolfe did not rise. He surveyed them as if they were a tray of hors d'oeuvres brought in error. "You will sit where Mr. Goodwin indicates," he said, and the room sorted itself according to a plan he had never spoken out loud. Crane and Duval together, because friction generates spark. Rosa across from Crane, because rivalries should see their own faces. Zadie near the side table, where the plate of almond tuiles waited like bait. Eduardo opposite the door, where I could watch his jaw. Vale against the bookshelf, where he could observe without affecting the air. Heliotrope closest to me, because wrists are easiest to catch at that range. Paolo sat last, jacket on his lap, eyes on the floor until he forced them up. "We will not rehearse the entirety," Wolfe began, voice even, "because I will not insult those of you who can follow an argument, nor coddle those who cannot. Mr. Belanti is missing. This is not a kidnapping. It is a manipulation executed under cover of service. It has 3 components: a trespass against a device, a confection that travels, and a phrase that preens. The trespass," he lifted the felt square with 2 fingers, "hushed an alarm. The confection," he tilted the plate of dust, "left scent and glitter where it touched. The phrase," he tapped the scrap and nodded at Vale, "was slithered into the world as if it were in sight." Crane leaned in, chin up. "And this meeting will get us where the police haven't gone?" "I've not invited the police," Wolfe said, "because I dislike their chairs." He let that sit until Crane's lips thinned. "Mr. Goodwin." I took Paolo's jacket and extracted the back gate key from the inside pocket. Brass, scuffed, a shallow nick near the bow where it had met another key on the ring too many times. Duval handed me his key on a ring with tags stamped like medals. Crane passed her lockbox key to me with the reluctant grace of a woman surrendering a prop. Wolfe required that each be placed on a white card like a museum display. Then he looked at them as if he could read diaries in the scratches. "Mr. Duval's," he said, indicating the ring with the meticulous label, is handled often, lives on a clip, exhibits symmetrical wear. Mr. Varini's lives in a jacket pocket, is retrieved at need, shows burrs from haste. Miss Crane's. He paused. The key she had produced was new. Has never opened a gate. He lifted his gaze. Miss Crane. She didn't blink. We replaced a batch last month after a locksmith recommended upgrades. Not this one, Wolfe said. This is a copy that has lacked a gate's resistance. The scratch near the shoulder is cosmetic, desk metal. Your lockbox key is practiced. Your gate key is theoretical. Either you have not used it, or you have used another. He moved on before she could dress the wound. Mr. Goodwin, the post-it. I set it on the desk under the lamp. Crane's head cocked. Duval squinted. Rosa's lawyer leaned forward and caught himself, remembering he couldn't build curiosity. Quieter back door, Wolfe said aloud, not because anyone needed to hear the words, but to force someone to hear themselves. A midtown number. The alarm vendor received a hang-up from that exchange. A felt square prepared on a pastry station was applied inside the alarm to muffle it. The person who ordered this did not write an email because the vendor would not take it. They would not risk a text because texts get forwarded and screenshotted. They used the only weapon left to the modern, scrap paper, and they handled the paper after handling the dust. Zadie's hands tightened in her lap. I saw it, and so did Wolfe, but he didn't look at her when he went on. The phrase, "The night belongs to those who arrive quietly," appeared on a scrap in Mr. Varini's office, scrawled in a hand that aspires to neatness. The same phrase was posted by heliotrope under a photograph of the past the same night. Wolfe turned his head, slow as a planet. You arrived quietly. You dined noisily. You smelled of anise. Heliotrope's mouth set. Up close, freed of the beanie and the hunch, they were one of those New York amalgams who survive on nerve and freelance. I smelled of kitchen, they said. If you rub flour and sugar into your fingers for a living instead of beer on your shirt, you might too. You do not rub, Wolfe said mildly. You collect, you post, you take money for eyes. You have tailed Mr. Goodwin. You like words that make you feel important. This one isn't yours. You copied it from a scrap you saw while pretending to be a patron. He shifted his gaze again. Ms. Ray. Rosa Liddell's head turned. The lawyer turned with it, half a second behind. We hadn't brought Celeste into the room, but her name did the work. She isn't here, Rosa said, flat. No, Wolfe said. She's at work or pretending to be. She left Confluo with grievance, sets her stations with an ice, and smokes clove like a sophomore. Mr. Panzer watched her enter a building on 9th Avenue and leave flour on a sleeve where flour had no right to be. She has skill in theater, but she lacks proximity to Confluo's office. For the quote to appear where it did, in Mr. Belanti's orbit, it required a hand inside your house. Duval swallowed. My staff is not homogeneous, Wolfe said. We have the trespass and the dust and the slogan. We also have the upstairs window, open to listen. Who, among you, both wants to be listened to and craves being the one who listens? He closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them. Mr. Vale, if you were to impersonate meaning, how would you dress your sentence? Vale pushed his glasses up with a forefinger. Not like that, he said. It tries too hard. Just so, Wolfe said. Miss Crane's temperament favors memos, not mottos. Miss Lytle's favors declarative sentences that begin with I. Mr. Duval's favors checklists with columns. Mr. Varini's favors recipes and oaths. Ms. Zadie's, he let the name rest in the air for a full second, favors craft over caption. Mr. Eduardo's favors the brief and the blunt. Heliotrope's favors the coy. We have eliminated everyone who would enjoy putting that phrase on paper where it would be found. That leaves a person who did not enjoy it, but used it, which points to someone who wanted it copied, not someone who wanted to own it. Zadie looked down. A fleck of green glittered on the cuff of her dark blouse like a confession. I could have sworn she saw it at the same moment I did, because she brushed at it and only succeeded in smearing it thinner. Wolfe's voice softened a notch. He can do that when he wants to stop a fall before it begins. "Miss Zadie," he said, "who asked you for advice about quieting the back door?" She kept her eyes on her hands. When she spoke, the words had to climb past a barricade. "No one asked," she said. "Someone complained." The alarm made the dining room nervous. It chirped at every smoke break, and the blogger wrote about ticks in the night. Paolo asked me if pastry had felt pads. He called them the soft things for pans. I said yes. He said a quieter door would keep the room from jumping. I gave him a square. He stuck it inside the box and told me not to tell Kieran because Kieran believes in rules. She swallowed. The dust. I wasn't careful. It gets everywhere. Wolfe's lids dropped half an inch. Not in condemnation, but in recognition. The pattern fit in a groove he had carved long ago. Paolo flinched. "I did not," he started, then forced it into coherence. "I did not know about alarms. I wanted it to be nice. People are afraid of noises at night. I thought, a felt square. What is the harm?" His voice thinned. Marco would have laughed at me. "Mr. Verini," Wolfe said not unkindly, "you are not the first man to confuse atmosphere with integrity. You made a quiet pocket. Someone else used it." Crane exhaled, half a laugh, half an accusation. "So the saboteur is the chef. That's on brand." "No," Wolfe said, and the flatness of the syllable put her back in her chair. "Mr. Verini made an error. Errors are opportunities, not motives. The motive sits elsewhere. We are not chasing a ghost in a toque. We are identifying the person who noticed the new hush and choreographed their entrance." Eduardo couldn't keep quiet. "Chef would not stage a vanish," he said, anger polishing his vowels. "He would stage a return. He would stage a correction," Wolfe agreed, "which is why he went to the office at 2:15 to retrieve a ledger number for a delivery dispute, and why he accepted a plate of dessert at 2:20, because he is human, and humans accept sugar when they are tired and think it is kindness." He turned his head to me. "Mr. Goodwin, the blotter." I put the desk blotter photo on the side table. The green ring winked. "The dust places him," Wolfe said. "The alarm's felt gives us the hush. The gate's hinge gives us the path. What we lack is the hand on his shoulder." He turned to Heliotrope. "You will now earn your invitation. You have posts, drafts, anonymous tips that were not entirely anonymous. You will give Mr. Goodwin your drafts from the past week, your raw photos from the night of Mr. Belanti's disappearance, and the names under which you booked your tables. If you prefer a subpoena, you may find that my distaste for the police does not extend to allowing you to pretend to be journalism without the duties." Heliotrope bristled. "I protected my sources." "You protected your revenue," Wolfe said. "Your source is someone who wanted to be overheard. You were not invited to be a confessional. You were engaged as amplification. Your drafts will show the timestamp on that motto. If it appeared in your pipeline before the kitchen closed, then the hand that wrote it in the office had already considered it's public. That hand belongs to our choreographer." The blogger looked at me, knew I would enforce Wolfe's suggestion without bruising and with efficiency, and tapped on their phone. An airdrop request chimed on mine. I accepted. The files came in, shots of the pass, of a plate with green sparkle, of a hallway with a door ajar and a shadow cutting the strip of light. Metadata gave the hour, 2:17, 2:20, 2:22. The caption draft with the motto had a save time of 2:23. I said it out loud. The room shifted, each person moving in their chair by the fraction that matches their guilt or their relief. 2:23, Wolfe repeated, which means the phrase existed for publication at least 3 minutes before the alarm's second chirp at 2:20. Therefore, the scrap in the office, copied or planted, predates the posting. The only person who could have written it in that office at that time and also stage-managed its appearance online is a person with access to both the office and the appetite to see their words echoed. He looked, at last, at Duval. Duval's face didn't move. The hands did. "I don't write captions," he said, but his voice had a new roughness. "I write schedules. You also write notes to yourself in a neat, aspirational hand," Wolfe said. "Your checklists, your reminders to reorder fish towels, you're behind on capers. Your letters are angling for print." He picked up the post-it with 2 fingers. "This script is yours." Duval stared at it as if the loops would deny him. "I tape notes on everything," he said, more to himself than to us. "It keeps the machine from missing beats. I called the vendor and hung up because I didn't want to argue with a recording. I wrote the note so I'd remember to ask someone who could fix it. Zadie could fix it. She did. That's operations." "It is," Wolfe said, the softness again. "Then let it go." "And operations were observed. Someone watched you try to make the back door quieter. Someone who knew that a quieter door could serve another purpose. They stole a phrase that flattered their sense of drama and pushed it to heliotrope like a proud parent. They opened an upstairs window to listen for the cue. And when Mr. Belanti stepped into the alley with praline on his sleeve, they were waiting. Paolo made a sound that wasn't a word. I felt it in my ribs. Wolfe shifted the yellow globe on his desk a 1/4 inch toward the door. It's as close as he comes to standing. "Mr. Panzer will retrieve Miss Ray," he said. "Mr. Goodwin will obtain from Heliotrope the names on their reservations and the method of payment. We will follow the cord that links a midtown hang-up, a pastry station's glitter, and a sentence written too early. At 4 this afternoon we will reconvene, and I will speak the name. Until then, you will not speak to the police, to each other, or to any person who sells information for clicks." He closed his eyes. "Fritz," he called, and the door opened on cue. "Coffee?" The room exhaled in different keys. Crane's lawyer cleared his throat to ask about confidentiality and thought better of it. Rosa watched Crane with the interest of a duelist. Zadie breathed like someone who had dropped a weight they didn't know they were carrying. Eduardo's fists unclenched. Vale wrote a single word and drew a line under it twice. Heliotrope texted a message that would ruin a headline in exchange for a future one. And Duval sat with his hands flat on his knees, staring at a post-it that had promised a quieter door and delivered a louder problem. After the coffee had been dispensed and the room cleared of outsiders, Wolfe let the silence reset. The residue of their presence lingered. Crane's perfume, Rosa's clipped tones echoing faintly in my head, Duval's posture stuck like a thumbtack in a corkboard. Wolfe's eyes were closed, but the crease between his brows told me he hadn't filed them away. "You saw it," he said at length, his voice low and certain. "The pattern. One hand writes, another amplifies, a third executes. It is not many, it is one, moving between guises." I leaned back in my chair, notebook balanced on a knee. "So you're saying we don't have a circle of suspects? We've got a juggler. Somebody who's been feeding heliotrope lines, messing with the alarm and dangling glitter where Marco would step." "Precisely. A choreographer." He lifted his glass of beer, studied the bubbles, then drank. "Mr. Panzer will fetch Miss Ray. She's not the choreographer, but she's a prop. Mr. Duval, his notes are honest, but honesty can be borrowed." The impostor mimicked his style, slipped their sentiment into his orbit, and left him compromised. "Mr. Goodwin, you will clarify who had the most to gain by placing suspicion on Mr. Duval while arranging for Mr. Belanti's absence." I asked the practical. "And how do I do that before 4? Knock on every door in Midtown with a whiff of anise?" "You will begin with the bloggers' payments," he said. "Follow the receipts. They will not have the foresight to launder their own bribes." That was my cue. I took Heliotrope's airdropped files, which included the reservation list Wolfe had pried out of them, and dug. 4 different names, same card processor, all traced back to a prepaid debit with reloads at a corner shop in Midtown. The address on the application? A co-working loft on 9th, the same place Saul had followed Celeste. I called the card company's verification line and asked politely until they asked less politely for a subpoena. That ended the fun. But even the scraps they gave were enough. The card had been topped off every Thursday afternoon by someone who used a phone number ending in 9321. A Midtown prefix. I didn't have to be Wolfe to hear the music. At 2, Saul delivered Celeste to the brownstone, not in cuffs. He leaves that to uniforms. But with the air of a man who had been convincing for longer than his patients liked. She was lean, hard, and smelled faintly of cloves, even through the perfume of sugar she carried from habit. Wolfe had her seated without preamble. "You're here," he said, "not as culprit, but as catalyst. You dust your confections with anise and pistachio. You carried some with you when you visited Mr. Verini's kitchen last week. You left fragments. Others used those fragments." Celeste smirked, arms folded. "And you think I care who sprinkles my leftovers? I left Confluo because Crane wanted hashtags on cakes. I don't sabotage kitchens. I build my own. And yet," Wolfe said mildly, "you walked through a gate at midnight, a gate that chirped less than usual. You walked because someone told you the moment was ripe. Who was it?" She blinked, and for half a second her defiance had a seam. She didn't say it to me," Saul cut in. "But when I brought her in, she asked if Marco was alive. Not if he was found. Alive." That landed like a stone in a pond. Celeste looked down, jaw tight. "I saw him," she admitted. "Not after midnight. Before. He came to my place the week before he vanished. Said someone was circling him. Said if he disappeared, it wasn't him walking. That's all." Wolfe nodded once, satisfied. "Then we confirm our trajectory." By 3, I had Heliotrope's payment trail lined up with Saul's notes. The blogger hadn't invented the motto. They'd been fed it, along with cash, through that prepaid card. The source behind the reloads was the same Midtown number as the post-it. I laid it out for Wolfe. "So we've got the wire back to one hub," I said. "All paths lead to that number. What's next?" "Next," Wolfe said, "we watch them hang themselves. I've arranged the net. At 4, when they reconvene, the weight of their own pretenses will pull the rope tight. You, Archie, will be prepared to fetch the ledger and the proofs from Mr. Duval's folder at my signal. Those papers will show us who the intended audience was. You need only open the correct page." At 4, the brownstone filled again, as if none of them had left, though the air had shifted. Crane's perfume cut sharper, Rosa's lawyer had grown more alert, Vale's glasses had picked up a polish, and Zadie seemed drained of all but dread. Eduardo paced like a man rehearsing a defense. Duval looked hollow. Paolo, jacket still folded on his lap, carried the stubborn hope of a man who refuses despair until it shakes him by the collar. Heliotrope pretended calm but kept tapping their tote, waiting for a new angle. Wolfe let them settle before speaking. We reconvened to remove the mask. Mr. Belanti was enticed, not forced. He stepped into the alley expecting a meeting, not an abduction. The alarm had been muffled, the gate eased, the confection placed. He believed it was private. It was not. Wolfe's eyes swept the room. The motto, the dust, the hush. All threads. The hand that tied them together sought both spectacle and erasure. Spectacle through Heliotrope. Erasure through the suggestion that Mr. Duval had authored the motto, but the true signature lies in the payments. I stepped in, notebook open. 4 reservations, 4 names, 1 prepaid card, topped off every Thursday from a Midtown shop. Same number as the post-it, same exchange as the vendor hang-up. Whoever fed the blogger also paid for the seat. Heliotrope shifted uneasily. I didn't know. You knew, Wolfe said. You chose not to ask. A journalist asks. You were content to sell. He turned to the rest. The choreographer is the same person who wanted quiet at the back door, who opened the upstairs window to listen, who planted the phrase in Mr. Duval's shadow and ensured it reached the blogger's feed. They used the felt from Miss Zadie's pastry, the dust from her station, the inattentive hope of Mr. Verini, and they paid for amplification with money that will trace to them. Crane sat forward, impatient. Name them. Wolfe's lids lowered. He let the silence compress the air until even Rosa's lawyer swallowed. Then he lifted a finger. Mr. Duval, if you would hand Mr. Goodwin the folder you carry. Duval passed it over, puzzled. Wolfe instructed me to open to the staffing schedule for the week before Marco's disappearance. I did. There, in neat, aspirational hand, was a notation in the margin. Confirm H at 2:20. Quiet. It was not a checklist. It was a script note. Mr. Duval, Wolfe said softly, you did not write this, but it is in your folder. It has your style, your rhythm. Who had access to your office, your clipboard, your habits? Duval's mouth worked, but no sound came. Then Zadie whispered it, barely audible. Marco. The room jolted. Paolo sat bolt upright. No. Wolfe raised a hand. Yes, Mr. Belanti. He borrowed Mr. Duval's hand, his office, his tone. He planted his own legend in plain sight. He met Miss Ray before, warned her he was circling. He created the motto, pushed it to heliotrope, dusted himself with his own dessert. He vanished not because someone dragged him, but because he required the vanish. Paolo's face drained. He staged it? For what? Survival, Wolfe said. Or myth? Perhaps both. The rivals gave him pressure, the investor gave him interference, the critic gave him judgment. He sought to step outside all of them and leave only story, but a story requires a narrator, and he chose poorly. The blogger's amplification exposed his phrase too soon. The dust betrayed its source. The hush of the alarm proved contrived. He's not gone, he is waiting. Crane scoffed. You're telling us the man disappeared himself? That's convenient. It is inevitable, Wolfe said coldly. No saboteur would risk such theatrics with so little reward. Only an ego convinced of its own genius would. Eduardo clenched a fist. He would not leave us. He would, Wolfe said. He told Ms. Ray as much. He told you in flourishes. He left his knives but took his role. He left his phone but took his motto. He's crafting his return. Whether he comes back to Confluo or to another kitchen with a ghost's fame, he intends to reappear. Rosa's lawyer muttered something about fraud. Vale wrote in his notebook, underlining furiously. Heliotrope looked rattled, realizing they'd been a pawn in Marco's marketing stunt. Paolo stared at the floor as though trying to wrestle his brother back by force of will. Wolfe closed it with the weight of certainty. Mr. Belanti staged his own vanishing. He exploited the habits of those around him. He is not a victim. He is the author. Now the only question is whether you allow him to return to applause or meet him with silence. The room fractured into murmurs, outrage, disbelief. Wolfe reached for the bell and rang for Fritz. Dinner was to be served, because human folly, however theatrical, must never delay a proper meal. And with that, the brownstone exhaled again, its sanctity restored, even if Marco's legend had just been written. Dinner gave Wolfe his piece and gave me my orders wrapped in a slice of apricot tart. He didn't need to say them out loud. The angle of his eyelids and the way he nudged the yellow globe told me where to go and what to bring back. I took my hat, my notebook, and the kind of patience you pack when you're about to look for a man who believes in his own legend. Midtown at night is a different country that happens to share sidewalks. The corner shop where the prepaid card had been fattened on Thursdays wore the security glass and fluorescent fatigue of a place that sells everything except sleep. The clerk had a memory like a lint roller. He didn't know names, but he knew habits, and he knew mine after 2 minutes of friendly conversation and the promise of making the inventory of scratch-off tickets lighter. "Guy with hands," he said, tapping his own knuckles. "Chef hands. No nails. Just work. Ball cap, not team. Paid cash for the reloads. Thursdays. Sometimes bought clove smokes. Sometimes mint gum like he was trying to apologize." He squinted. He had a scar here. He drew a line just below his right thumb. "Knife slip. I used to cut deli. You never forget where your knives put their signatures." "Where does he go after he buys your apologies?" I asked. The clerk shrugged toward 9th. Loft building with the ugly mural. "He buzzes the side door like he lives there, but he doesn't. Men who live places don't look over their shoulder before they do it." Saul was waiting on the block with the mural that should have been indicted. He didn't say hello because we don't waste time on ritual when a door might open. He jerked a thumb up at the second floor. A thin light slit showed beyond blinds in a window that had opinions about drafts. "Your clove poet went in," he said, "but came out 20 minutes ago, alone, flower on the sleeve again. She headed south. Your chef, if that's what we're calling him, hasn't shown, but somebody's been inside an interior room since 9. A fan kicked, then died, then kicked again. Ghost kitchen, or a man who doesn't like the quiet he wrote for himself." We didn't knock. If a man wants to vanish and you knock, he stiffens his vanish. We waited. Patience is not my favorite tool, but Wolfe likes it used, so I used it. A little after 11, the fan gave up the ghost entirely, and the slit of light became a rectangle. A shadow crossed the blinds, stopped, and crossed back. Then the side door's latch clicked, soft. I stepped into the mouth of the alley and let the building deliver him to me. Marco Bellanti didn't look like myth. He looked like a man who hadn't eaten correctly in 3 days and had been sleeping on ideas. He carried a roll that didn't need a label to tell you knives lived inside. He saw me, measured the street in a heartbeat, and decided to spare us both the jog. "Goodwin," he said, "because names on newspapers travel in kitchens." "Bellanti," I said. "You're trending. You want a cab or a conversation?" "I want a week," he said, "and a plate of pasta." "You get one of those if you come with me," I told him. "The other depends on how you talk to Mr. Wolfe." His eyes flicked past me to Saul, who can't hide being what he is no matter what shadow he rents. Marco exhaled through his nose, and in that breath I heard resignation and pride fighting for the bill. "You found me fast," he said. "Your legend sprung leaks," I said. "You should sue your copywriter." He didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth did something that remembered how. "I want to tell it," he said, and there it was, the sentence that men say when they've built a story out of themselves and think it will hold up under light. "We'll let you," I said, "in a room with better chairs." The cab ride uptown was silent except for the city counting tips. Marco kept his roll on his lap like a talisman. Up close, I saw the scar under his thumb the clerk had remembered, and a nick I hadn't been told about, white like an old lesson on his forearm. When we hit 35th, he looked at the brownstone with the concentration of a man tasting a sauce he's only read about. "I thought he didn't like cooks," he said. "He doesn't," I said. "He likes competence. It confuses him when it wears an apron." Fritz answered the bell like he had been waiting behind it. He took one look at Marco and vanished to make the kitchen behave. Fritz's hospitality is a language that doesn't need translation. I led Marco to the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He observed. "If you think that's easy, try doing nothing in a way that makes other people confess." Marco set the roll on his knees like a dog that didn't trust strangers. "Mr. Wolfe," he started, and the formality tried to do the heavy lifting for him. You staged your disappearance," Wolfe said civilly. "You used a quieter back door you had requested to create a pocket of silence. You accepted a sugared plate that carried a glitter you knew would testify to your presence, and you planted a phrase you hoped would become law. You then ensconced yourself in a workspace where you would be seen only by the person you wanted to see you, your future. Marco's mouth flattened. When you put it like that, it sounds cheap. It is cheap, Wolfe said, but cheapness often buys you what you want if the crowd is properly credulous. He didn't flinch. I wanted out, he said. Not from food. From the circus. Ms. Crane wants names that click. Duval wants lists that breathe on their own. Rosa wants me to come work her line and call it freedom. Heliotrope wants a villain they can taste on their phones. Paolo? He cut a look at me, weary. Paolo wants me to be his right hand, and his shadow. I wanted a door that wasn't any of those. So I made one. By walking out mid-service, I said. Elegant. He shot me a glance that carried heat for the first time. Service was done, he said. We had plated the last, and I told Eduardo to watch the pass. I went to the office to write the number for a delivery dispute because Duval would never forgive me if I didn't. I ate the bombolone because Zadie loves me the way you love a colleague who never wastes flour. I walked through the back because it smelled like my head was on fire in there. I didn't ask anyone to come with me. You asked the world, Wolfe said, the way you wanted to. The motto is yours. He hesitated a fraction too long. I wrote it a week before, he said, on an order pad. It's stupid. It sounded good at 2 a.m. Heliotrope, I knew they were there. They're always there. I wanted them to see what I wanted them to see. A line, a man stepping into it. Then a week of rumor. Then a pop-up in a borrowed room with 12 seats and no names on the door. Night belongs. We'd serve food that didn't have to perform. Commendable sentiment, Wolfe said without warmth. Dishonorable execution. Marco met his eyes as if he recognized a kind of judge he would have to accept. I was going to call Paolo, he said. I was. After a week. Tell him it wasn't about him. That would have been a lie, Wolfe said. It was about you. He didn't argue. He sat straighter, as if getting ready to carry the weight himself. So now what? You drag me back and make me apologize to the investor, to the blog, to the man who wants to put QR codes on the desserts? You will face Mr. Vereni, Mr. Duval, Mississippi Crane, Ms. Lydell, Ms. Zadie, Mr. Eduardo, Mr. Vale, and the blogger whose appetite you employed, Wolfe said. And you will do it in this room. Tomorrow at 11, you will listen while I arrange your motives in front of them. Then you will make a choice. Restore what you injured or cede it. Neither would be respectable. Neither would be theatrical. Marco swallowed something that wasn't broth. What if I don't come? Then Mr. Goodwin will tell Heliotrope the truth, Wolfe said mildly. And your legend will curdle into a cautionary tale about men who mistake dessert dust for substance. I took out my phone and set it on the desk where Marco could see the light touch it. He sighed, a sound of capitulation that might also have been relief. I'll come, he said. I'll finish what I started. Good, Wolfe said. Now Mr. Goodwin will escort you to a place where you can sleep that is not a room for rent above a Pilates studio. We didn't take him far. There's a small hotel 5 blocks away that pretends to have been there before the war and gets away with it because the doorman remembers your face. I paid cash and used a name that wouldn't trouble the register. In the room, Marco put the knife roll on the bureau like a priest putting down a book. You're not handcuffing me? He asked. If I had to, I'd do it with words, I said. Wolfe's better at knots than I am. He sat on the bed and looked at his hands as if they belonged to somebody he had to negotiate with. How angry is Paolo? He asked. He hasn't decided, I said. He's deciding between blood and forgiveness. The trick to Wolfe's rooms is they push people off fences. He nodded. Bring him early, he said, voice rough. I'd rather talk to him before the others smell it. I'll try, I said. Don't make me hunt you again. He gave me a tired salute, the kind men give when they don't think they deserve more. I left him with a key and my number and the kind of lecture I usually save for nephews. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had not moved, which for him is the sign of great activity. I gave him the parcel, Marco's confession in the cheap paper of ordinary sentences. He absorbed it with the small, satisfied sounds he reserves for orchids that finally bloom on his schedule. "Ms. Crane?" he asked. "She'll want to turn it into an activation," I said. "She'll suggest staging Marco's return with a live stream and a limited menu and call it closure. You'll tell her to sit down." "I will tell her to eat," he said. "If she refuses either, she can dine on her own ambition." We let the night have a little of itself. Saul sent a text that consisted of a single word, posted, and a link to Heliotrope's latest, a non-article about rumors and responsibility and the ethics of vanishing, hedged with enough subjunctive mood to keep a libel lawyer yawning. Vale sent a private note. "If your man returns, he will need to plate humility." Rosa's lawyer asked if we had notified the police. I told him the police would be notified when there was something for them to do, besides be disappointed. At 8 in the morning I called Paolo. He was already awake. Men who have had their hearts put through a mandoline don't sleep so much as they wait. I told him I had Marco and that he wanted to see him before the room filled. There was silence, the kind that tastes like iron. Then, "Tell him to come. I don't bring knives." I collected Marco from the hotel at 9:30. He had shaved, which improved nothing except his posture. He carried the role because men like him don't leave their hands, unoccupied in hallways. In the cab, he didn't speak. When we stopped, he looked at the brownstone as if it had grown teeth overnight. Paolo was in the office when we came in, sitting in the chair across from Wolfe, jacket folded like a truce flag. He stood when Marco entered, and then seemed to forget why men stand. I stayed by the door because rooms like that know how to take care of themselves once you get the people right. Marco put the roll down on the edge of Wolfe's desk and faced Paolo without theatrics. "I was stupid," he said. "Not because I left. Because I left like that." Paolo's mouth worked, and when words came, they were chopped fine. "You left me," he said. "You left the line. You left Lucky. You left them to make excuses for you." Marco nodded once. "I know," he said. "I thought a week was a story. It was just a lie measured in days. I wanted to make something that wasn't for anyone else. I forgot that anyone else is why I learned to cook." Paolo stared at him for a long beat that might have been a life. "You come back," he said finally. And the way he said it had both meanings. To the restaurant, to yourself. "You stand with me tonight and plate the hanger for the midnight seating and let them see you do it. No motto. No heliotrope. Just meat and heat. Then we talk about what happens after." Marco's throat moved. "I'll come," he said, and it was the first sentence he had said in the room that didn't sound like it wanted to be printed. Wolfe cleared his throat just enough to remind us the room had a center. "At 11, he said, "the others will join us, and we will place the matter in order. Ms. Crane will propose spectacle. I will propose sobriety. Mr. Verini, if you consent to accept Mr. Belanti back for a single night with no promise beyond that night, we will offer the city a sight it rarely sees. Competence without caption." Paolo nodded. "For one night," he said. Then we will eat," Wolfe said. And that was his judgment wrapped in hunger. I called Duval and told him to bring the ledger and the schedule and a fresh shirt. I told Zadie and Eduardo to come hungry. I told Heliotrope nothing because they would come whether invited or not. I told Rosa she could attend without her lawyer if she wanted to hear something worth hearing. I told Crane nothing about return or redemption. If you tell investors the ending, they rewrite the middle. At 10:50, the doorbell began again. The brownstone took its breath, the way it does before a performance it didn't audition for, and I watched the room settle into the shape Wolfe wanted. Outside, the city counted downward toward noon. Inside, a chef sat with his knives and his shame, a restaurateur sat with his appetite and his pride, and a man in a red leather chair arranged a quiet that didn't need felt to hold. At 11, the room filled like a pot that knows when to boil. Crane arrived first, impatience leading the way. Rosa right after, no lawyer this time, but the kind of smile that keeps one on retainer. Duval carrying the ledger like an affidavit. Zadie and Eduardo side by side, shoulders squared. Vale with his notebook and that careful expression he wears when he intends to be fair and hopes to be kind. Heliotrope a half step behind everyone, already collecting angles. Paolo sat where he'd sat at 9, jacket folded in his lap like an oath he wasn't ready to swear. Marco came in last with me, the knife roll a quiet admission. He didn't look at anyone but Paolo, and when he sat, he kept his hands flat where all of us could see them. If you think hands don't tell a story, you've never worked a line. Wolfe didn't clear his throat or raise a hand. He simply let silence do what it does for him. When the respiration of the room matched his metabolism, he spoke. "We have come," he said, "to place facts in their proper sequence and to assign to each of you the portion that belongs to you. No more, no less." Crane leaned in. "A sign away," she said, and her voice had the clink of glass. "Ms. Crane," Wolfe said, "you will have yours. But first the matter at its center." He shifted his gaze to Marco. "Mr. Belanti." Marco didn't stand. He didn't need to. His voice did the work. "I left," he said. "Not because anyone dragged me. Because I mistook theater for strategy. I softened the alarm with a felt square Zadie gave me. My request, my stupidity. I wrote a line on a pad that sounded like meaning at 2 a.m. I let it travel where it shouldn't. I took a week I didn't earn. That's the truth." Crane made a sharp sound. Rosa didn't. Rosa watched Wolfe because she's been around long enough to know where gravity collects. Duval's jaw tightened until it found another setting. Zadie stared at a thread on her cuff. Eduardo looked like he wanted to pound the air and then decided it wasn't a steak. Wolfe let the confession sit like a course no one had ordered. Then he flicked his eyes to me. I put the prepaid reload slips on the edge of his desk, the corner shop's security still in them, and the clerk's description jotted in my hand. The money that paid for the blogger's seats, I said for the room, was loaded by a man with a scar under the right thumb, chef hands, a ball cap, and a habit of buying clove smokes and mint gum on Thursdays. He looked over his shoulder before he buzzed a side door on 9th. "That's our man." I didn't have to point. Marco's scar did it for me. Heliotrope swallowed. "I didn't know who paid," they said, quiet for once. "I don't ask who reloads cards." "Because you preferred not to know," Wolfe said. "Ignorance makes fine mulch for your crop." He turned back to Marco. "You enlisted an amplifier without honor, a vendor without sense, and a rival's pastry dust without permission. Your genius, such as it is, remained your own. Your judgment did not." Paolo spoke without looking away from Marco. "You come back tonight," he said, and again the words doubled. "To the kitchen, to yourself. Midnight seating. You stand with me and stay until the last plate leaves and the last pan is clean. Then we talk about tomorrow like men who can read a clock." Marco nodded once. "Yes," he said. "Not so fast," Crane said, and the temperature on the rug dropped a degree. A staged disappearance is a reputational event. Investors are stakeholders in narrative. If Mr. Belanti reappears, we capitalize. "No," Wolfe said, and it carried enough brick to build a wall. "You will not capitalize. You will stabilize. You will attend the midnight seating, and you will sit silently and allow competence to restore appetite. If you attempt to garnish it with spectacle, I will garnish you with a recording of your assistant retrieving a new, unused gate key from a lockbox for photographs." Crane's cheeks colored, then cooled. She would fume later with people who are paid to absorb it. She's not stupid, which is why she stopped talking. Rosa cleared her throat, all honey. "If Mr. Belanti wants a room without slogans," she said, "Cardinal and Rye has—" "Ms. Liddell," Wolfe said, and if he was tired of interruptions, he hid it under impeccable courtesy. "You will discover a surfeit of dignity this afternoon. It will serve you this evening when you dine like a civilian." Rosa smiled wider. She knows when to stop swinging. Duval finally found a word that fit. "You left a note in my folder," he said to Marco, and the hurt in it wasn't about paper. "My hand, my margin. You borrowed my orderliness to hide your poetry." Marco didn't pretend otherwise. "I did," he said, "and I'm sorry." "You'll be sorrier in inventory," Duval said, and it was almost merciful. "You'll count capers until your motto can swim." Zadie looked up at Marco with eyes that had slept less than flour. "If you ever want to make a praline that doesn't cling like a bad habit," she said, "you can ask before you steal dust." He shook his head. "I didn't." Then he stopped. "I stole plenty. You can have it all back tonight." "Not dust," she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted. "Work." Eduardo cleared his throat and spoke for the line. "If you show at 11:30, he said, "don't talk. Grab a fish towel. You know where they live." It was both punishment and absolution. Wolfe let the current settle. Then he turned the lamp toward heliotrope so their reflection showed on the brass. "You will publish," he said. "Not a tease, not an insinuation, a correction. You will state that you were paid to attend using prepaid reloads and that you accepted a motto from a source who had a reason to vanish. You will also append a note about the proper use of dessert, which is to be eaten and not weaponized." Heliotrope made a face. "We'll lose followers," they said. "Excellent," Wolfe said. "You may gain readers." Vale adjusted his glasses. "May I say," he began carefully, "that it is a rare and possibly restorative thing to watch a room choose competence over theatrics. If Mr. Varini and Mr. Belanti intend that this evening, I will come and watch what I am paid to watch. If, however, if anyone attempts to sculpt an arc," Wolfe said, "you may go home at course 2. Vale inclined his head, oddly grateful to be told no. Wolfe faced Crane again. "You will apologize to Mr. Varini and to his staff for meddling with the kitchen's rhythms under the guise of brand. You will remove yourself from the midnight menu for 3 weeks. You will not issue a release. If you insist on communicating, you will instruct your assistant to inform patrons that Confluo is serving dinner." Crane's jaw worked. "She is a woman who does not love the taste of apology." "And what do I receive," she said, "for this restraint?" "An asset that continues to exist," Wolfe said blandly. "Also lunch, assuming you have the sense to eat." She gave an almost laugh, which is as close as she has to concession. There was one more piece left on the board, and Wolfe moved it with the economy of a man who hates fussy finales. "Ms. Ray," he said, and though she wasn't there, the name altered the air. "Tell her, Mr. Goodwin, she is absolved of sabotage and burdened with the knowledge that edges cut both ways. If she wishes to gloat, she may do so alone, preferably while washing a piping tip." "Consider it sent," I said. Wolfe squared the yellow globe against the corner of his desk, a signal he uses when the architecture holds. "Mr. Varini," he said, "if you are wise, you will accept Mr. Belanti's labor for one evening and make no promise beyond it. Afterward, you will meet with your staff without investors, bloggers, or critics and decide what a kitchen is for. If your decision is slogans, I cannot help you. If it is food, I have." Paolo looked at Marco and found what he could tolerate for now. "One night," he said. "After that we talk." Marco said nothing. He nodded because there are rooms where nodding is the only honest verb. Wolfe glanced at the clock. His not the cities. You will all leave now. Mr. Verini and Mr. Bellanta have work to prepare. Mr. Duval has a power to restrain. Ms. Crane has a mouth to control. He transferred his gaze. Mr. Vale has a pencil to sharpen. Heliotrope has a conscience to locate. And Mr. Goodwin has shoes. Chairs scraped, apologies braided with threats, and the brownstone began exhaling its guests. In the hall, Crane paused with a look that was almost sport. You think you can order a market, Mr. Wolfe? No, Wolfe said, bored. Only a room. That put her outside, where the market lives. Rosa lingered just long enough to tell Paolo, if you two do what you say, dinner is on me tomorrow night. She didn't specify where. That was her form of leverage and her form of grace. Zadie touched Marco's sleeve. Not quite a forgiveness, more a marker. 11:30, she said. Fish towels. Eduardo clapped him once on the shoulder and left it at that. Vale, at the threshold, looked back. A pleasure, he said to Wolfe. Eat first, Wolfe told him. Heliotrope tried for a handshake and thought better of it when my eyebrows asked a question their brand couldn't answer. We'll publish, they said instead, which in their lexicon is contrition. When the street reclaimed them, I shut the door and returned to the office. Paolo had gone to arrange for meat and fire. Marco hadn't moved. He looked at Wolfe the way men look at surgeons, aware that gratitude and fear are the same posture when something vital has been cut out, and you're waiting to see if the rest will learn to work without the tumor. You did me a favor, he said, which wasn't an admission so much as an inventory. I did Mr. Verini one, Wolfe said. I do nothing for theatricals. Marco stood, lifted the knife roll, and finally let his eyes take in the room. I'll be at the pass, he said. No speeches. An improvement, Wolfe said. We saw him to the door without ceremony. That's another thing about the brownstone. It doesn't clap. When the latch settled, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. The orchids upstairs were due their visit, but he wasn't in a hurry. He let the chair keep him. Fritz appeared with coffee that smelled like a considered opinion. Wolfe sipped, then opened one eye. Mr. Goodwin, he said, you will attend this evening's performance. If at any point you detect a slogan, you will cough. Subtle, I said. Effective, he countered. I pocketed my notebook and thought about an alley that had been too quiet, a plate that sparkled where it shouldn't, a phrase that wanted to be a prophecy and turned out to be a mirror. Outside, the city reset its appetite. Inside, the brownstone had done what it does when people bring it their noise. It had sorted it and sent it back out as work. Fritz from the hall. Sweetbreads, Mr. Wolfe. They abhor neglect, Wolfe said, and the room's edges softened. I took my hat for the last lap of the day. Midnight would have heat in hands and no captions if I could help it. And if anyone forgot and reached for a motto, I had coughs enough for a dozen plates. I could tell from the way Wolfe shifted in his chair that the curtain was about to drop. He had been silent through the early moments of the gathering, his lips pressed in that stubborn straight line, eyes half closed as if drowsing. But when Nero Wolfe straightens a fold of his vest and presses his fingertips together, it's never a nap he's after, it's blood. Figuratively speaking. The suspects were assembled in the office. Spread across the chairs and sofa, like a cast that hadn't yet learned its lines. Lucien Varda, the rival chef with a reputation for innovation, sat stiffly, hands clasped too tightly. Anita, the missing man's assistant, kept twisting her scarf like she was trying to wring water out of it. Mr. Moffat, the club owner who had financed the midnight event, looked as if he would rather be anywhere else, though his eyes darted too often toward Wolfe, as if waiting for a reprieve. And finally, Gabriella Conti, the widow whose involvement had felt peripheral until Wolfe insisted she attend. I stayed on my feet, leaning near the bookshelves, prepared for Wolfe's orchestra to begin. He glanced at me once, which was my cue to stop shifting my weight and stay put. Wolfe's voice came, deliberate and soft, but it sliced the room into silence. A man does not vanish into ether, Mr. Goodwin. He is made to vanish, and when a chef of repute disappears after midnight, leaving behind a half-prepared creation and a frightened assistant, the causes are neither mystical nor accidental. Lucian cleared his throat. You can't seriously think I... Wolfe raised a hand the size of a loaf of bread. I think, Mr. Varda, that you were very glad when rumors spread of René Dubois' disappearance. Glad because his prominence cast yours into shadow. Glad because the midnight event at the club might have ended with your humiliation, had his dish been tasted. But gladness is not guilt. That earned Wolfe a frown from Lucian and a visible sigh of relief, which, of course, Wolfe had intended. He let the silence stretch, his gaze shifting to Anita. You worked with him closely. You claim you were devoted, but devotion does not prevent alarm. You knew, even before his absence was public, that he was in peril. She stammered. I just knew something wasn't right. He told me he'd uncovered... She stopped herself, clutching her scarf tighter. Exactly, Wolfe said. He told you he had uncovered something, a theft, recipes and methods, lifted from his notes and presented elsewhere as novelties. But you were not the thief, Miss Anita. You lacked the means. What you did was keep silent. That is venial, not mortal. All eyes swung to Moffat, who shifted in his chair like it was suddenly too narrow for him. Now, wait a minute. I brought René here. I wanted his talent at the club. You wanted the prestige, Wolfe corrected. But prestige comes with risk. René Dubois was not merely flamboyant, he was meticulous. When he told you he had traced the theft to your circle, to someone close to your financial arrangements, he signed his own warrant. It was you who arranged for him to step outside the back door that night, you who feared exposure more than scandal. His disappearance was no disappearance. It was removal. Moffat's face drained as Wolfe's words sank in. He opened his mouth, shut it again, then tried to laugh it off. That's a fine story, but you've got no what? Wolfe leaned forward, his bulk making the chair creak. No proof? Proof enough exists. The torn contract in your desk drawer, which Mr. Goodwin observed this afternoon, where Dubois had written in his own hand that he would expose you for misappropriating funds under the guise of culinary sponsorship. The hired driver, who has already admitted to transporting a trunk at your request that night, and your own haste to summon Mr. Goodwin before the police might be brought in. You sought to use us as a shield. That landed like a hammer. Moffat sputtered, his palms sweating on the arms of the chair. It wasn't... He was going to ruin me. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke with the weight of finality. Mr. Dubois lies in the river, or buried where your accomplice left him. That is a matter for the authorities. What concerns me is that you imagined art could be strangled to save commerce. For that, you deserve not merely punishment, but contempt. Anita began crying softly, while Lucienne sat stunned. Gabriella Conti, who had been silent all along, looked at Wolfe with something almost like gratitude, though I couldn't say why. I phoned Inspector Kramer, who did his usual routine of pretending he didn't want to hear another word from me, then demanding the whole account. By the time the police arrived, Moffat had wilted into a puddle of nerves, too broken to keep denying. When they'd all been hauled out and the office door finally closed, I exhaled and looked at Wolfe. He had leaned back, eyes shut again, as if the whole exercise had been as exhausting as it was inevitable. "Another case wrapped?" I said, "and another evening shot to pieces. But tell me, why'd you accept this one in the first place? You could have ignored Gabriella's plea and kept your orchids company." Wolfe opened his eyes, slow and deliberate. "Because, Archie, the theft of genius is worse than the theft of coin. René Dubois was a fool in many ways, but he was an artist. To let him vanish unremarked would have been an abomination. And," he pressed his palms together, I detest abominations. I nodded, though I wouldn't have put it in those words. Fritz poked his head in to announce that dinner was served, and just like that, the sanctity of the brownstone restored itself. Wolfe heaved himself to his feet. "Archie, tonight we will have saucisse de Toulouse with lentils. It is suitable, perhaps in remembrance." I grinned. "You got it. And after all that high drama, I'd say a plate of sausage and beans is about as close to heaven as I care to get." That closed the book on the case of the chef who vanished after midnight. Wolfe had done it again, without leaving his chair, without lifting more than his voice, and with just enough sting in his final words to make me glad I worked for him rather than against him. And as always, it ended the way it should. Wolfe at the table, me with a quip, and the world outside still as crooked as ever, 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 still as crooked